"Get out of my chair, you're not his wife anymore. You're furniture." Victoria Blake hurled her champagne into Eleanor Whitmore's face and drove the empty crystal down so hard the base split. Then she grabbed the wife's wrist and tore the wedding ring off her finger. Alexander Whitmore watched his mistress bleed his wife's hand and raised his glass to her. 400 people saw it. Nobody moved. Eleanor didn't wipe her face. She didn't touch her torn finger. She set the broken glass upright, folded her hands, and looked past them both at the doors already opening behind Victoria's back. If you're watching, subscribe to the channel and stay with me until the very end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels tonight. Eleanor Whitmore looked down at the ruined plate in front of her, then up at the young woman standing over her, and said nothing at all. That was the part nobody could handle, the silence. If she had screamed, they would have known what to do with her. If she had thrown the glass back, half the room would have gasped, and the other half would have pulled out their phones. But Eleanor just sat there, hands in her lap, her expression unchanged, and the not knowing spread through the tables like cold water. "Nothing," Victoria said. She was smiling. She had been rehearsing this smile in mirrors for 8 months. "You don't have anything to say?" "I have a great deal to say," Eleanor answered. Her voice was quiet, even almost kind. "I don't think you'd enjoy it." "Try me." "No." That was all. One word. Victoria stood there holding her empty glass, waiting for the rest of the sentence, and the rest of the sentence never came. It made her look for one long second, like a woman who had walked up to a locked door and knocked on it with her whole hand. "Vicky," Alexander's voice from 2 seats down, amused and lazy and completely unbothered. "Sit down, you're making a scene." "I'm making a scene," Victoria laughed. "She's the one sitting there like a statue." "That's what she does." Alexander lifted his own glass. 10 years. That's what she does." The man at the next table, Gordon Reese, 64, hotels 3 marriages, a face like a fist, turned his head very slightly toward his wife and murmured something. His wife didn't answer. She was watching Eleanor. A waiter appeared, young, terrified, with a fresh napkin. "Ma'am, I can let me just—" "It's fine," Eleanor said. "I can bring you another." "It's fine. Thank you." She looked up at him, and something in her face made him stop apologizing. "What's your name?" Marcus, ma'am." "Marcus?" She nodded once. "Nobody here is angry at you. Go on." He went. He would remember that for years, that in the middle of the worst 30 seconds of that woman's life, she stopped to make sure the busboy wasn't scared. Victoria sat down, not because Alexander told her to, because standing had stopped feeling like winning. Across the table, Catherine Doyle leaned in. Catherine had known Eleanor since they were 19, and she was the only person in that room with the nerve to say it out loud. "Eleanor, get up." "No." "Get up and walk out and let me drive you home and let them all sit here and eat their $60 chicken and think about what they just watched." "Catherine." "He laughed, Eleanor. Your husband laughed." "I know." "Then why are you still sitting here?" Eleanor turned her head and looked at her oldest friend, and for the first time all evening, something moved behind her eyes. "Because I'm not finished," she said. Catherine sat back. She didn't ask what that meant. She'd known Eleanor Caldwell for 26 years, and she had learned a long time ago that when Eleanor said something like that in that particular tone, the smart thing to do was pour yourself a drink and wait. 2 tables over, a woman was already whispering, "That's the wife, God. She looks so tired. She used to be beautiful. She's still beautiful, that's not the point. He's got 20 years on that girl. He looks ridiculous. He looks happy. He looks ridiculous." That was the strange thing about the Metropolitan Charity Gala. 400 of the most powerful people in the country, and inside of 90 seconds, they'd all turned into a high school cafeteria. Alexander Whitmore knew exactly what he was doing. That was what nobody understood afterward when they tried to explain it to themselves. They wanted it to be an accident. They wanted him to be a man who got drunk and lost control. He wasn't. He had eaten 2 bites of dinner and drunk half a glass of champagne, and he was in complete command of himself. He had planned this. "You're quiet," he said to Eleanor. "Yes." "You're always quiet." He said it like a diagnosis. 10 years and I still don't know what goes on in there." "You never asked." I asked. You asked, and then you started talking, Eleanor said. That's not asking, that's waiting. Alexander's jaw tightened just slightly, and Victoria, who was watching him the way a dog watches a hand, saw it and misread it completely. She thought it was anger. It wasn't. It was surprise. It had been 3 years since Eleanor had bothered to answer him at all, and he had gotten so used to the silence that he had started to believe he had earned it. There she is, he said, recovering smiling for the tables. The famous Whitmore wit. Where's it been hiding? Somewhere you don't go. Gordon Reese laughed out loud and then coughed into his fist. His wife kicked him under the table. Alexander leaned in. He dropped his voice, and this was the first thing he said all night that wasn't for an audience. Don't do this here. Do what? Don't embarrass me. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Alexander, she said, listen to yourself. He didn't. That was the whole tragedy of Alexander Whitmore. In one sentence, the man never listened to himself. He had spent 10 years listening to the sound of his own name in other people's mouths and had mistaken the echo for a voice. Victoria touched his arm. It was a small thing. 3 fingertips on a black sleeve, and she did it in full view of 400 people, and she did it because she wanted them all to see. She wanted the whisper to start at her table and travel to the walls. She had been the second woman for 3 years and 8 months, the woman in the car park, the woman with the separate hotel room, the woman who watched New Year's fireworks from a window alone, and tonight was the night she stopped being second, or so she thought. Alex, she said sweetly, you promised. I know. You promised you'd say something tonight. I said I know. Because if you're going to lose your nerve, Victoria. His voice went flat, and for half a second, she saw something in him that she would later spend a very long time thinking about. Don't ever suggest I lose my nerve. She sat back satisfied, thrilled, absolutely certain she had just steered a billionaire. She had not steered anything. He had been going to do it anyway. He had booked the microphone 3 weeks earlier. She was not the driver of that car. She was the ornament on the hood. Eleanor watched all of it. Every glance, every touch, every small transaction of power between them, and she cataloged it the way she had been cataloging things for 11 months. Not out of jealousy. She was past jealousy. Jealousy had come and gone in a single terrible week the previous March, and what had replaced it was something colder and far more useful. She had known since a Tuesday. That was what people never guessed. They imagined the wife discovering it in some cinematic way, a lipstick, a text, a hotel receipt. It hadn't been like that at all. It had been a Tuesday, and Alexander had come home at 7:40, and he had kissed her on the forehead, and he had asked her how her day was. He never asked how her day was. That was it. That was the whole thing. A man who hadn't asked her a real question in 4 years asked her one on a Tuesday, and Eleanor stood in her own kitchen with a dish towel in her hands and felt the floor tilt. She had not confronted him. She had not cried. She had said, "It was fine, how was yours?" And she had gone upstairs and sat on the edge of the bathtub for 11 minutes without moving. And then she had made a phone call. Elle. Her brother's voice, 10 o'clock at night, already awake, always awake. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. You're calling me at 10. Something's wrong. Daniel. Eleanor. A pause. Talk. And she had said out loud for the first time in a voice she barely recognized, I think my husband is seeing someone. Daniel Caldwell had been silent for 4 full seconds. 4 seconds is a very long time on a telephone. Then he said, Do you want me to find out or do you want me to know? What's the difference? Finding out takes a week. Knowing takes a month, and it ends things. Eleanor had looked at herself in the mirror over the sink. She was 41 years old. She had given a decade to a man who had stopped asking how her day was. No, she said. That had been 11 months ago. 11 months. Long enough for a man to make 100 careless decisions. Long enough for a woman with the right last name and the right brother to watch every one of them land. You're smiling, Alexander said suddenly. Eleanor blinked. Am I? You are. What's funny? Nothing's funny. Eleanor. Something had shifted in him. He was studying her now, and he did not like what he saw, and he could not have told anyone why. What's funny? I was thinking about a Tuesday, she said. He waited. She didn't explain. And for the second time in 5 minutes, Alexander Whitmore experienced a sensation he had almost forgotten, the sensation of not being in possession of all the information in the room. He hated it. Victoria leaned across him. Are we boring you, Eleanor? Not at all. You've been sitting there all night like you're at a funeral. Have I? You could at least pretend to enjoy yourself. It's a charity gala. It is, Eleanor agreed. Do you even know what the charity is? And here, Eleanor turned her head slowly and looked directly at Victoria Blake. For the first time all evening really looked at her, and Victoria felt the temperature of the conversation change and could not identify the cause. The Whitfield Children's Literacy Initiative, Eleanor said, founded 1968, operating in 14 states. It has an endowment of about $90 million and an annual outlay of a little over $6. She paused. Would you like to know who put up the original $11 million? Victoria's mouth opened. Nothing came out. No, Eleanor said. I didn't think so. It was the smallest exchange. 8 seconds. Nobody at the far tables even heard it. But Catherine Doyle, sitting 3 feet away, put her napkin over her mouth and looked at the ceiling and thought, oh, honey, you have no idea what you've done. The thing about Victoria Blake was that she wasn't stupid. People said it afterward she was a stupid girl, and it was lazy and it was false. Victoria was quick. She was disciplined. She had come from a 2-bedroom apartment in Bayonne and clawed her way through night school and into an executive assistant's chair by being the smartest person in every room that would let her in. Her problem was not intelligence. Her problem was that she had learned the world from the outside. She had studied wealth the way a person studies a foreign country from a guidebook, the labels, the restaurants, the vocabulary, the way you hold a glass. She knew every visible sign. And so she looked at Eleanor Whitmore, the plain dress, the plain hair, the plain shoes, no jewelry but a wedding band, and she read every one of those signs, and she concluded with total confidence that she was looking at a woman with nothing. She had never once considered that there is a level of money at which people stop performing it. She's so plain, Victoria had said to Alexander once in a hotel room, laughing. How did you stand it? And Alexander, this is the part that would ruin him. This is the sentence, and he said it while looking at the ceiling. Alexander said, I didn't marry her for excitement. Then what did you marry her for? He'd been quiet for a moment. Access, he said. And then he'd laughed like it was a joke, and Victoria had laughed too, and neither of them had understood that he had just told the truth so completely and so casually that it should have terrified them both. Back in the ballroom, a woman in green stopped at their table, Diane Foster, old New York, older money, the kind of woman who had been going to this gala for 41 years and had never once had a good time at it. Eleanor, she said. Diane. You look well. Thank you. Diane's eyes flicked very briefly to the wet plate that hadn't been cleared to Victoria, to Alexander, and back. Is your father coming tonight? She asked. The table went completely still. Eleanor didn't move. I don't know, she said. He doesn't tell me his schedule. Diane's mouth did something that was not a smile. He told me his schedule. And she walked away. Victoria looked at Alexander. Alexander was looking at the tablecloth. Who's her father? Victoria asked. Nobody answered. Alex, who's her father? Nobody, Alexander said. Some retired guy in Boston. Catherine Doyle made a sound into her napkin that was not a cough. And here is where the evening turned, though nobody in the room could have said so at the time. Because Victoria Blake, who was not stupid, who was quick, who noticed things, sat back in her chair with a small cold feeling starting somewhere under her ribs, and thought, why did that woman ask about her father? Eleanor Caldwell. Whitmore had spent 32 years learning how to be invisible on purpose. It started when she was 9. Her mother, Margaret, had taken her to a lunch at the Harvard Club and told her on the walk in, Eleanor, look at me. When people find out who your father is, you will stop being a person to them. You will become a door. Do you understand what I'm telling you? No. You will, Margaret said. And when it happens, I want you to remember that a door doesn't have to open. She had understood it at 19 when a boy she liked very much asked her on their third date in a very casual voice what her father did. She had understood it at 24 when a woman she had considered a close friend for 2 years brought a business plan to her birthday dinner. And she had understood it finally completely and permanently at 31 when a young man named Alexander Whitmore sat across from her at a dinner party in Cambridge and talked to her for 40 minutes about a book she loved without once asking what she did, who she was, or who her family was. She had gone home that night and sat in her car in the driveway and thought, he doesn't know. He had known. He had known before he sat down. He had asked the host who she was 6 weeks earlier, and he had read that book specifically cover to cover in 3 nights. She would not learn that for 10 years. She learned it 11 months ago from a woman named Priya who had hosted that dinner party and who called Eleanor out of nowhere on a Thursday afternoon with a strange, guilty, halting voice. "Eleanor, this is going to sound insane." "Okay. Alex asked me about you before the dinner." "Okay." "He asked me, Eleanor, he asked me what you read." And Eleanor had said very calmly, "Priya, I have to go." And she had hung up the phone and gone and stood in the garden for 40 minutes in November without a coat. That was the real betrayal, not Victoria. Victoria was a symptom. The betrayal was the book. "You're doing it again," Alexander said. "Doing what?" "That." He gestured at her face. "The nothing, the blank." "It isn't blank. It's blank, Eleanor. It's been blank for 3 years. Do you know what it's like living with that?" And here, incredibly, his voice actually cracked with something like grievance. "Do you know what it's like coming home every night to a wall?" Catherine Doyle put down her fork. "Alexander," Eleanor said quietly, "I want you to think very carefully about whether you want to have this conversation at this table." "Why not? You never want to have it at home." "Because at home you are not performing." "I'm not performing." "You're always performing," Eleanor said. "That's what you are. You've been performing since Cambridge. You performed a man who read Nabokov." Alexander went white. It was the fastest thing that had happened all night. 1 second he was a billionaire, and the next second he was a 33-year-old man in a rented suit who had stayed up 3 nights with a paperback and a highlighter. "What did you say?" he whispered. "You heard me." "Eleanor, Priya called me," she said, "in November." The silence at that table was so total that Victoria could hear her own pulse. "What?" she said. "What does that mean, Alex? What does that mean?" He didn't answer her. He wasn't even in the room anymore. He was staring at his wife across a 1.5 feet of tablecloth with an expression of absolute undiluted horror, and the horror was not guilt. It was arithmetic. He was counting months. November to now. That's 11 months. She's known for 11 months. 11 months of me thinking I was how long, he said. "Alexander, how long have you known?" Eleanor picked up her water glass. Her hand was perfectly steady. She took a sip, set it down, and looked at him. "About Victoria," she said. 11 months. About the book." She paused. "The same day." Something in his face came apart. And Victoria Blake, sitting beside him watching this, Victoria, who had spent 3 years and 8 months constructing an entire interior architecture on the belief that Alexander Whitmore was hers, that he had chosen her, that this dull gray wife was a formality, he was serving out? Victoria said in a voice that had gone thin and high, "Wait, 11 months. Nobody looked at her. 11 months, Alex. She's known for 11 months, and she never said anything. She never... Victoria laughed, and the laugh had a crack running through it. "That's not a person. That's not how a person acts. Why wouldn't she say anything?" And Eleanor turned to her, slowly, almost gently. "Because I wasn't waiting for him to stop," she said. "Then what were you waiting for?" Eleanor didn't answer. That was the moment Victoria understood not the whole shape of it. Not yet, not by half, but she understood something the way you understand a sound in the house at 3 a.m. before you understand what made it. She had walked into this ballroom tonight believing she was the hunter. She was beginning to suspect she had been walked in. "Alex," she said. "Alex, look at me. Alex. Not now. Look at me. Not now, Victoria." It was the first time he had ever spoken to her like that in public, and it landed on her like a slap, and 3 tables saw it, and by tomorrow it would be a story in 19 offices. Alexander stood up. He stood up too fast and his chair scraped and half the room turned. He straightened his jacket. He put his hand flat on the table for a second, steadying himself, and then he did the thing that people would talk about for the rest of their lives. He looked at his wife and he said quietly so only she could hear, "Whatever you think you're doing, Eleanor, you're a Caldwell in name only. Your father hasn't returned my calls in 6 years. Nobody's coming." Eleanor looked up at him, and she smiled. A real one. The first real smile out of her all night, and it was the most frightening thing that had happened in that ballroom in 41 years of galas. "Alexander," she said, "why do you think he stopped returning your calls?" He stared at her. "Go give your speech," Eleanor said. He went. The walk from table 14 to the stage was about 90 feet. Alexander Whitmore made it in maybe 30 seconds, and he later could not remember a single one of them. He shook 2 hands. He said Gordon to a man who was not Gordon. He arrived at the microphone with his heart going like a fist on a door, and no idea none that the woman he had spent 10 years underestimating had already made 3 phone calls that afternoon. Behind him, Victoria was gripping her glass hard enough to whiten her knuckles. "He's going to say it," she said to no one. "He's going to say it." "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "I think he is." Victoria whipped around. "You don't even care." "I care a great deal. You're smiling." "Yes." "Why?" Victoria's voice climbed. "Why are you smiling? What is wrong with you? He's about to stand up there and tell 400 people he's leaving you, and you're sitting there smiling like—" Eleanor turned in her chair and faced her fully. "Victoria," she said, "may I ask you something?" "What?" "When he told you about me, what did he say?" Victoria's mouth was dry. "He said you were cold." "What else?" He said you came from money but that it was old and it was gone, and that your family had cut you off years ago." Eleanor nodded slowly. "And you believed that?" "Why wouldn't I?" "Because you're smart," Eleanor said, and she said it without a trace of sarcasm, and somehow that was worse. "You're very smart. You noticed everything about me. The dress, the shoes, the car. You noticed all of it, and you built an entire life on the conclusion." She tilted her head. "Did you ever look me up?" Victoria said nothing. "You didn't," Eleanor said. "Because he told you not to bother, and you didn't wonder why a man would care whether you bothered." Victoria's hand had started to shake. She put the glass down. Across the room, someone was tapping a microphone. "He's not leaving me for you," Eleanor said quietly. "I want you to hear that from me before it happens, because in about 11 minutes, there isn't going to be anyone left who'll be kind enough to tell you the truth. You don't know anything about—" "He is leaving me because he thinks he no longer needs me," Eleanor said. "That's all this is. You are not the reason. You are the timing. That's not—" "Ask yourself why tonight," Eleanor said. "Why not last year? Why not next year? Why tonight in this room in front of these 400 people at this charity?" She leaned in half an inch. "This isn't a love story, Victoria. It's a press release." And then from the stage, amplified warm, easy the voice of a man who believed with his whole chest that he was about to be applauded. "Good evening. I promise I'll be brief. I know there's dessert." Laughter. Real laughter. 400 people who liked him. Eleanor Whitmore reached over, picked up her water glass and drank. Under the table in her lap, her phone screen lit up once and went dark. It said 2 minutes out. She didn't look at it. She already knew. The microphone gave one soft thump under his thumb, and 400 people turned their faces toward Alexander Whitmore like flowers turning toward a lamp. 8:41 on a Saturday night. Dessert had not come out yet. That detail mattered later because every single person in that hall would remember that they were still hungry when it happened. "I promise I'll be brief," he said again, and got the laugh again and wrote it. At table 14, Catherine Doyle leaned into Eleanor's ear. "Elle, whatever this is, whatever you've got, tell me now." "No." "Eleanor." "Catherine, if I tell you, you'll look at the doors." Catherine froze with her mouth half open. "Don't look at the doors," Eleanor said pleasantly and picked up her fork. On stage, Alexander was doing the part he was good at. He thanked the committee, he thanked the hotel, he made a joke about the seating chart that got a genuine roar out of the back tables, and he felt it land in his chest the way it always did, that warm electric confirmation, and he thought, I've still got it. Whatever she thinks she knows, I've still got the room. 1968, he said. That's when this thing started. Some people in this room were at the first one. Gordon, you were at the first one. I was 12, Gordon Reese shouted. You were 40, Alexander said, and the room came apart. Victoria Blake laughed so hard she had to put a hand on the tablecloth. She was laughing at a joke she'd heard him rehearse in a car 3 days earlier, and she laughed like it was brand new because that was one of the 17 jobs she'd been doing for 3 years and 8 months without ever once being paid for any of them. Eleanor did not laugh. Eleanor cut a piece of chicken she had no intention of eating and set the fork down. He's warming them up, Catherine murmured. Yes, he's good at it. He's the best I've ever seen, Eleanor said, and she meant it, and that was the terrible part. She had married a man who could make 400 strangers love him in 90 seconds, and she had spent 10 years watching him do it to everyone in the world except her. 8:44. Now I want to say something serious for a minute, Alexander said, and the room settled because they knew that voice. That was the voice from the earnings calls. That was the voice that had talked a bank out of pulling a line of credit in 2019. A lot of you have watched me build something, he said. 12 years, from nothing, from a room over a dry cleaner in Long Island City with 2 folding chairs and a guy named Petey who quit after a month because I couldn't pay him. Warm laughter. And people ask me all the time, Alex, what's the secret? How'd you do it? He paused. He had the pause down to about a second and a half. And I always give them the same answer. I say I did it because nobody handed me anything. At table 14, Catherine Doyle's fork stopped moving. Eleanor's expression did not change by 1 millimeter. Elle, Catherine whispered, don't. Elle, he did not just say that. He says it every time, Eleanor said. He said it to Forbes. He said it at Wharton. He said it at my father's dinner table in 2016, with my father sitting 4 feet away. What did William do? He passed the potatoes, Eleanor said. Catherine put her hand over her mouth. 8:46. Nobody handed me anything, Alexander repeated. And that's not a complaint, that's a gift, because when you build it yourself, you know exactly what it's worth. Applause. Real applause. 200 people who had inherited everything they owned, applauding a self-made man at a gala funded by a family fortune, in a hall that had been paid for in 1968 by a woman named Constance Caldwell. Eleanor picked up her water and drank. Diane Foster across the room did not applaud. Diane Foster sat with her hands in her lap and looked at Eleanor Whitmore, and Eleanor looked back, and something passed between the two women that had no words in it at all. Alex is on fire, Victoria said to nobody, to the table, to the universe. God, look at him. I'm looking, Eleanor said. Victoria's head snapped around. She had expected nothing. She had gotten a full sentence calm agreeable, and it unsettled her more than an insult would have. You know he's about to end your marriage, Victoria said. I know what he's about to do. And you're just going to sit there. Yes. Why? Eleanor set her glass down. Because it's the last thing he'll ever do standing up. Victoria's stomach did something cold. 8:49. So here's the serious part, Alexander said. 12 years. And somewhere in year 8 or 9, I looked around and realized something. He touched the microphone stand. I realized I'd built the company, and I'd never built a life. The room went quiet in a different way. Gordon Reese put down his drink. I did what you're supposed to do, Alexander said. I checked the boxes. Good school, good job, good marriage. He said the word marriage the way you'd say insurance. And I did it right. I want to be clear about that. I did it right. I did it by the book, and I want to say publicly that I have no regrets about how I've lived. At table 14, Catherine Doyle said out loud, "Oh, you son of a bitch." 3 people at the next table heard her. But at some point, Alexander said, a man has to ask himself a question. And the question is this: am I living or am I performing? Eleanor's fork touched the plate with a small, clean sound. The word had come out of her mouth 11 minutes ago at that table. He had picked it up and carried it to the microphone and was now saying it to 400 people as though it had been his all along. "That's mine," she said quietly. "What?" Catherine said. "That word, that's mine. I said it to him at this table." Eleanor's voice was still perfectly level. "He's been on stage for 8 minutes, and he already stole from me twice." "Twice? He'll get to the second one." 8:51. "Because I've been performing," Alexander said, "for a long time, and this year, for the first time in a decade, I stopped." He let a breath out into the mic. "I stopped, and I chose happiness over duty." Somebody at the back of the room made a noise. It wasn't a gasp. It was smaller and uglier than a gasp. It was the sound a person makes when they realize what they're watching and can't get up. 400 heads turned to table 14. Eleanor Whitmore sat with her hands folded and her face composed, champagne still drying on her collar, her ring finger still bare, and she did not give them one single thing. Not a flinch, not a tremble, nothing. And the room, which had been ready to pity her, began very slowly to be afraid of her instead. "Look at her," a woman whispered. "She hasn't moved." "Why isn't she moving? I'd have thrown a chair." "That's why nobody's scared of you, Barbara." 8:52. "No, I'm not going to embarrass anyone tonight," Alexander said, which is the single most reliable sentence in the English language for predicting that someone is about to be embarrassed. "This isn't the place, but I do want to say thank you to someone who stood beside me for 10 years. Catherine grabbed Eleanor's wrist under the table. "He wouldn't." "He will." "Eleanor, he wouldn't." "Watch him." "Eleanor," Alexander said into the microphone, and 400 people held their breath. "Thank you for your service." The word went through that ballroom like a wire snapping. Service, not love, not partnership, not 10 years. Service. The word you use for a doorman, the word you use for a car. Gordon Reese, 64 years old, 3 marriages, a face like a fist, said Jesus Christ, loud enough that his table heard him and the table behind him heard him. A woman in green stood up, put her napkin on her chair, and walked out. Diane Foster did not look back. Alexander watched her go, and something flickered behind his eyes, but he was moving too fast. Now he was in the current. He had said the hard part, and he was still standing, and nobody had stopped him. "And thank you," he said, "to the person who reminded me what it feels like to want to come home." He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. Victoria Blake stood up. 8:54. Later, in 19 offices and 40 living rooms, and one deposition, people would argue about whether Alexander had asked her to do it. He hadn't. He'd have stopped her if he could. But he was 90 feet away behind a microphone, and Victoria had been waiting 3 years and 8 months, and there was a glass in her hand and a room full of the exact people she had been picturing since she was 22 years old, in a 2-bedroom apartment in Bayonne, with a bus stop outside the window. She stood up and she lifted the glass, and she was radiant. "To Alex," she said. 400 people looked at her. "To a man," she said, "who finally had the courage to walk away from a life built on obligation." Nothing. No applause, no murmur, not one clink. 400 people sat absolutely still with their hands in their laps, and the silence went on for 1 second and 2 seconds and 3, and Victoria's smile stayed exactly where it was, because her face had stopped taking instructions. "Oh no," Catherine breathed. "Oh, honey." "To new beginnings," Victoria said louder. Nothing. Somewhere near the kitchen doors, a young waiter named Marcus stood holding a tray of untouched desserts and did not move because his manager had grabbed his sleeve and hissed, "Don't you dare walk out there right now." "Am I the only one with a glass?" Victoria said, and she laughed, and the laugh came out at the wrong pitch and it hit the walls and came back at her. At the microphone, Alexander Whitmore had gone the color of paper. "Victoria," he said. His own voice, amplified, hit her like a hand. "Sit down." She turned to look at him, and that was the moment. Everyone in the room saw it. The moment where Victoria Blake, who had just publicly claimed a billionaire in front of 400 people, looked across a ballroom at the man she had bet her entire life on, and he would not meet her eyes. 8:56. She sat down. She sat down very slowly, and she put the glass on the tablecloth, and her hand was shaking so hard the base of it chattered against the plate before she got it flat. "Sit down," Eleanor said quietly. "I am sitting." "I know. I'm not telling you to. I'm telling you it's all right that you did." Victoria's head came up. Her eyes were huge and bright and furious. "Don't you dare be kind to me." "I'm not being kind," Eleanor said. "Kind would have been telling you 9 minutes ago. I did. You didn't hear it." "Shut up." "All right." "You shut up, you smug, dried-up plain little—" "Victoria." Eleanor's voice didn't rise. It just arrived. "There are 400 people in this room, and every single one of them can hear you." Victoria stopped. Her mouth was still open. She closed it. And into that silence from somewhere 3 tables away, a man's voice said, not unkindly, almost gently, "Sweetheart, who are you?" Victoria Blake had a lot of answers to that question. She had built them for years. "I'm the chief of staff to Alexander Whitmore. I'm the person who runs his calendar, his board packets, his relationships, his life. I'm the one who caught the Draper error in 2023. I'm the one who told him not to take the sterling money." She opened her mouth, and not one of them would come out, because she had just understood in the space of about 4 seconds that in this room she had no name at all. 8:58. Alexander was coming back from the stage. He was doing it wrong, and he knew it. He was walking too fast. He wasn't stopping to shake hands. Gordon Reese put out a palm, and Alexander went past it like it wasn't there. And Gordon looked at his own hand for a second, and then very deliberately in front of his entire table wiped it on his napkin. That was the first one. Nobody realized it at the time, but that was the first man in that ballroom to publicly wipe Alexander Whitmore off his hand, and by Thursday there would be 9 more. He arrived at table 14 and stood over his wife. "Get up," he said. "We're leaving." "No." "Eleanor, get up." "Alexander," she said, "sit down. You look ridiculous standing there." He sat. He didn't mean to. His knees did it before his pride could file an objection, and the second he was down, he understood he had lost a foot of ground he would never get back. "What did you do?" he said. "I haven't done anything." Don't do the voice. "What did you do, Eleanor?" "I sat here," she said, "and I watched you thank me for my service." Something went across his face. "That's not what It's the word you used. It's not what I meant." "Alexander." She turned and faced him fully for the first time in 3 years. "I have spent a decade listening to what you meant. I'm done. From now on, I'm going to respond exclusively to what you say." He stared at her. 9 o'clock. His phone buzzed in his jacket. He ignored it. "Listen to me," he said low, fast, and this was the first time all night his voice had any grain in it. "You want to be angry? Be angry. You want to bury me in a divorce? Fine. Take the house, take the boat, take whatever you want, I don't care. But not here. Not in front of these people. You know what these people are." "Yes," Eleanor said. "I do." His phone buzzed again. "Because if you humiliate me in this room," he said, "it isn't just me. It's 400 jobs. It's the Newark facility. It's Petey's kid who works in my mailroom. Eleanor, I hired Petey's kid." "You're doing it right now," Eleanor said. "Doing what?" "Performing." She said it gently, which was the cruelest available option. "Petey's kid. Alexander, you rehearsed Petey's kid." His phone buzzed a 3rd time, and a 4th, and then it started buzzing and did not stop. 9:02. Catherine Doyle watched Alexander Whitmore's face as he pulled the phone out of his jacket, and she said afterward that she had never seen a living man look like that. Not scared. Scared came later. This was something before scared, the half-second where the body knows and the brain is still catching up. 11 missed calls. He scrolled. His thumb was not entirely steady. Marcus Hale, his chief financial officer, who had never called him at night in 6 years. 3 times. Ben Oyalaran, his general counsel. Twice. Sterling Bright Capital. The main line, not a person. Nobody calls from a main line at 9 o'clock on a Saturday. And at the top, the most recent 40 seconds, old Diane Foster. Alexander looked up. The seat where Diane Foster had been sitting was empty. Her napkin was still on the chair where she'd left it. "Eleanor," he said. His voice had changed. Eleanor, what is this? Answer it. What is this? Alexander, Eleanor said. For 11 months, every time your phone rang, you looked at it and then you looked at me and you smiled and you said it was nothing. She nodded at his hand. Go on, say it's nothing. The phone kept buzzing. Victoria Blake was staring at it. And this was the moment when Victoria, who was not stupid, who was quick, who had spent 3 years and 8 months learning that man's calendar better than he knew it himself, did the arithmetic that she should have done a very long time ago. Sterling Bright called the main line. Ben called twice. Marcus called 3 times. Nobody calls 3 times unless the first 2 were about the same thing. And that woman asked about her father. Alex, she said. He didn't hear her. Alex. Louder. Alex, who is her father? Not now. Who is her father? Victoria, I swear to God. You told me they cut her off. Victoria's voice was rising and she couldn't stop it. You told me. You told me in Chicago, in the room you said her family threw her out when she married you. You said it was one of the reasons you felt responsible for her. Catherine Doyle made a sound like she'd been punched. Say that again, Eleanor said. Victoria turned. Say that part again, Eleanor said, the part about feeling responsible. Victoria's mouth trembled. He said your family cut you off when you married him. He said you had nothing. He said he'd carried you for 10 years and he couldn't leave you because you'd have nowhere to go. The silence at that table lasted about 4 seconds. Then Eleanor Whitmore started to laugh. It was not a big laugh. It wasn't cruel. It came out of her almost by accident, 3 quiet notes, and she put 2 fingers against her mouth to stop it, and she failed, and it came out again. Oh, Alexander, she said. Eleanor. That's good. She was still laughing. That's genuinely good. That's 10 years of work right there. Eleanor, stop it. He told you he was carrying me. Eleanor turned to Victoria, and her eyes were bright, and for the first time all night, there was something raw in her face. He told you he was carrying me, and you believed him, and you spent 3 years feeling sorry for me, didn't you? Not just triumphant. Sorry. Somewhere in there you pitied me. Victoria's face crumpled for 1 instant and rebuilt itself. Yes, she whispered. I know, Eleanor said. I could see it. Every time you looked at me at the Christmas party, you had the exact face a person makes at a shelter dog. Eleanor, Alexander said. Stop. 9:04. Do you know what this gala is? Eleanor asked. Victoria stared at her. You asked me earlier if I even knew what the charity was, Eleanor said. I answered you. You didn't hear the answer. Nobody ever hears the answer. Alexander, do you know what this gala is? He said nothing. Alexander. Her voice went flat and hard for the first time all evening. Say it out loud. It's the Whitfield, he said. Founded in 1968, Eleanor said. By whom? He didn't answer. By whom, Alexander? By your grandmother, he said. Victoria's hand went to the tablecloth. Constance Caldwell, Eleanor said. She put up $11 million in 1968, which in today's money is somewhere north of 100, and she did it in a room with 9 people and no press because she didn't like press. The endowment is $91 million. The family has never taken its name off it and has never put its name on it. She looked at Victoria. You just stood up in my grandmother's building and toasted my husband for escaping his obligation. Victoria made a small sound. That's why nobody clapped, Eleanor said. 9:05. You don't understand, Alexander said. He said it to nobody. He was looking at his phone, which had gone quiet, which was so much worse than the buzzing. You don't understand what you've done. I've done nothing. 11 months, Eleanor. 11 months you've been sitting in my house. Our house. 11 months you've been sitting in my house knowing and smiling at me and passing me the salt, and you never once said a word. That's right. That's insane. His voice cracked open. That's not a wife, that's not a person. Do you understand that normal people scream? Normal people throw things. Normal people give you a chance. Alexander, Eleanor tilted her head. Would you like to hear what I did instead? He stopped. 9:06. In November, Eleanor said, I called my brother. Do you remember Daniel? Don't. He asked me a question. He said, do you want me to find out or do you want me to know? And I asked him what the difference was. Eleanor took a breath. He said finding out takes a week, knowing takes a month, and it ends things. Alexander Whitmore did not move. I said no, Eleanor said. Eleanor. He called me back in February, she said. It took him 3 months, not 1. Do you know why it took 3 months? Stop. Because it wasn't about her, Eleanor said. Victoria took him about 40 minutes. 40 minutes, Alexander. She's a $200 receipt in a Chicago hotel and a car service invoice with the wrong passenger name on it. She wasn't hidden. You didn't hide her. You didn't even try to hide her, and I want you to sit with that for a second because I think it's the only part of tonight that's going to keep you up. Victoria's face went white. It took him 3 months, Eleanor said, because of everything else. The table did not move. Nobody breathed. What else? Alexander said. His lips barely moved. Alexander. What else, Eleanor? You know what else, she said. And here is the thing that 400 people saw and could not interpret. They saw Alexander Whitmore, the self-made man, the man from the room over the dry cleaner, the man who had just given the best 8 minutes of his life, at a microphone put both hands flat on a tablecloth and hold on to it. Sterling bright. Eleanor said, called your main line at 9 o'clock on a Saturday. They didn't call your assistant. They didn't call Ben. They called the line that gets picked up by a machine, which means they wanted a record that they called. Stop. Marcus called 3 times. Marcus doesn't call once. Stop. Diane Foster called you 40 seconds after she walked out of this room, Eleanor said, and Diane Foster has sat on the Whitfield board since 1984. Alexander Whitmore looked up at his wife. What did you do? He whispered. I stopped protecting you, Eleanor said. 9:07. That's it, she said. That's the whole thing. That's all I did. Everybody wants it to be complicated. It isn't. For 10 years, when someone came to me and said, Eleanor, your husband is doing something reckless, I said he's ambitious. Give him room. When my father put down his fork in 2016 and looked at me and said, that man just told this table nobody handed him anything, I said, Dad, he's proud, let him have it. When Daniel called me in 2019 and said, I've read the Draper filings and I don't like them. I said, Daniel, please, he's my husband and my brother who has never in his life let anything go, let it go, for me. She said it perfectly calmly, and it was the most violent thing said in that room all night. 11 months ago, Eleanor said. I stopped. Eleanor, I didn't attack you. I didn't leak anything. I didn't call one reporter. She looked at him steadily. I just stopped saying give him room. 9:08. That's all, she said. You built it, Alexander, every bit of it. You said so at the microphone. Nobody handed you anything. She spread her hands slightly. So I took my hands off it. You don't have that kind of... Say the rest of that sentence, Eleanor said. He couldn't. Say it, she said. You were going to say I don't have that kind of power. Go on. Say it out loud in my grandmother's building. Alexander Whitmore said nothing. Victoria Blake was crying, silently, not moving. Tears coming down a face that was still absurdly wearing $1,100 of makeup she had bought that afternoon, because tonight was the night she stopped being second. He's going to be fine, she said. Isn't he? He's going to be fine. He always lands, Victoria, Eleanor said, not unkindly. Sweetheart, look at his hands. Victoria looked. Alexander Whitmore's hands were shaking on the tablecloth. 9:09. At the back of the ballroom near the entrance, a hotel manager in a black suit walked very quickly along the wall with a radio held against his chest, and he did not walk like a man responding to a spill. Catherine Doyle saw him. Catherine Doyle had been watching the back of the room for 11 minutes because she was the only person at that table who had listened when Eleanor said, "Don't look at the doors," and she had been looking at almost nothing else ever since. "Elle," she said. "Yes." Somebody just told the manager something and his face went white. "Yes." "Eleanor." Catherine's voice had gone very quiet. "You told me not to look at the doors." "I did." "Why?" Eleanor Whitmore reached over, picked up the cracked champagne glass, and set it carefully out of the way. "Because I didn't want anyone looking at them," she said, until they opened. 9:10. They opened. Nobody announced it. Nobody made a sound. 400 people were watching table 14, and the doors at the back of the Whitfield Grand Hall swung inward on hinges that had been oiled that afternoon, and for about 3 full seconds, not one person in that room noticed. Then Gordon Reese noticed. Gordon Reese, 64 years old, 3 marriages, a face like a fist, who had been at the first one in 1968, when he was in fact 40 and not 12, stood up out of his chair so fast he knocked his own wine over, and he did not look down at it. "Oh my God," he said. His wife said, "Gordon, sit. Barbara, turn around." She turned around. And then the whole back half of that ballroom turned around table by table like a wave going the wrong way up a beach, and the sound that came out of them was not a gasp. It was quieter than that, and it lasted longer, and it was made up of 400 people saying "oh" under their breath at slightly different times. William Caldwell was 81 years old. He walked with a cane he did not need and had carried for 9 years because it made people slow down when they talked to him. He came through those doors in a suit that was 14 years old and looked it, and he did not look at anyone, and he did not stop, and every single person he passed got out of his way without being asked. Margaret Caldwell was on his left. She was 78. She had run the Whitfield board from 1984 to 2001 and had never once let her photograph be taken at it. She had gray hair cut short, and she was wearing a black dress that had been to that hall 11 times, and she was not looking at the crowd either. She was looking at her daughter's face, and at the champagne dried on her daughter's collar, and at her daughter's bare left hand. And Daniel Caldwell came behind them, 46 years old, 6'4", in a suit that had cost more than the table, carrying nothing at all, which was the detail people kept coming back to afterward. No briefcase, no folder, no phone in his hand. Daniel Caldwell walked into that ballroom with his hands empty, and every lawyer in the room understood exactly what that meant, and 3 of them put their drinks down. "Alex," Victoria whispered. He didn't move. "Alex?" Her voice went up. "Alex, who is that?" Alexander Whitmore had gone completely still. He was still holding the tablecloth, 9/11. "Alexander," Eleanor said, "you have about 40 seconds. I'd stand up." "Eleanor, I'm not being cruel. I'm telling you the truth. If he reaches this table and you're sitting down, everyone in this room will remember for the rest of their lives that you didn't stand up." She looked at him. "It's the last favor I'm going to do you. Take it." He stood. His chair went back too far and hit the table behind him, and someone caught it. Victoria stood up too, half a beat late, because she didn't know what else to do. And she was the only person in that entire ballroom who still didn't understand what she was looking at. "Somebody tell me who that is," she said. Catherine Doyle, who had not spoken in 4 minutes, said without turning around, "Honey, that's her father." "So," and Catherine Doyle laughed, 1 syllable. It got away from her. "So," Victoria said, again louder. "So what?" "He's an old man in a bad suit." "Victoria," Eleanor said quietly, "stop talking, please. Don't tell me to—" "I'm not telling you," Eleanor said. I'm asking you to stop talking because in about 9 seconds, my mother is going to be close enough to hear you and Victoria. I have known that woman for 41 years, and I am telling you as a kindness that you do not want her to hear you." Victoria stopped talking. 9:11 and 40 seconds, they arrived. William Caldwell did not look at Alexander Whitmore. That was the first thing. He walked past his son-in-law of 10 years at a distance of 18 inches and did not turn his head, and Alexander stood there with his hand half out, 400 people watching, and had to bring it back down. The old man went to his daughter. He didn't say anything at first. He looked at her collar where the champagne had dried, and then at her left hand, and Eleanor saw him see it, and she watched something move across her father's face that she had seen exactly twice in her life. He put his hand on her shoulder. "Are you ready to come home?" he said. The Whitfield Grand Hall had 400 people in it, and every one of them heard it because it was that quiet, and because William Caldwell had never in his life had to raise his voice. Eleanor Whitmore closed her eyes for about 1 second. "Yes," she said, and that was all. 2 words each, 9 words total between a father and a daughter, and it went through that ballroom like a bell, and grown men who ran banks looked at the floor. 9:12. "William," Alexander said. Nothing. "William," Come on, let's you and I go somewhere and... Margaret Caldwell turned her head. That was it. She turned her head and looked at him, and Alexander Whitmore stopped mid-sentence like a man who had walked into glass. "Alexander," she said. "How long have you known me, Margaret?" 10 years. 10 years, and you've called me Margaret exactly twice both times tonight, and I want you to understand that I noticed." Her voice was perfectly pleasant. "You call me Mrs. Caldwell when you want something, and you call me Margaret when you're frightened. It's a tell. You've had it for a decade. Nobody told you, because nobody who noticed it liked you enough to bother." Somebody 2 tables away said out loud, "Oh." "I'd like you to be quiet now," Margaret said. "My daughter's been sitting in wet clothes for half an hour." She took off her wrap and put it around Eleanor's shoulders, and she did it the way a mother does, quick and businesslike, no ceremony, and it undid Eleanor more than anything else that had happened all night. Her chin went, just once, just for a second. "Don't," Eleanor said. "I know. Mom, don't. I've held it together for 11 months. Don't." "Eleanor." Margaret's hand cupped the back of her daughter's head for 2 seconds. "You held it together. It's held. You can put it down." 400 people watched Eleanor Caldwell Whitmore put her forehead against her mother's shoulder for exactly 3 seconds, and then straighten up, and then wipe under one eye with the side of her thumb, and then be absolutely fine. Gordon Reese turned around and said something to Barbara with his hand over his mouth. Barbara said, "I know." 9:13. Daniel Caldwell had not spoken. He was standing about 4 feet from Alexander, and he was not looking at him, and he had his hands in his pockets, and he was reading the room, left to right, table by table. He got to the empty chair with the napkin on it where Diane Foster had been sitting, and he stopped there for a moment and nodded very slightly to himself. Then he looked at Alexander Whitmore. "Alex," he said. "Danny. Don't. Daniel." "Better." Daniel's voice was mild. It was the mildest voice in the room. "How's your phone?" Alexander didn't answer. "Because it's been quiet for about 6 minutes, Daniel said. "That's the part you're thinking about, not the 11 calls, the 6 minutes of nothing after. Daniel, you want to know what the 6 minutes is?" Daniel took one hand out of his pocket. "The 6 minutes is people getting on a call with each other instead of with you." Alexander Whitmore's face did something that 400 people watched and did not entirely understand. "That's not... Marcus called you 3 times, Daniel said. At 8:51, 8:54, 8:58. You didn't pick up. At 9:01, he stopped calling you." He tilted his head. "Alex, your CFO stopped calling you. What do you think he's doing right now? You did this. No. You did this, you." "Alexander." Daniel's voice didn't change at all. "I want to be extremely precise because you're going to repeat this conversation to a lot of lawyers. I did not do anything. I read publicly available filings in 2019. I formed an opinion. My sister asked me to keep it to myself, and I kept it to myself for 6 years." He paused. "In February, she released me." Victoria Blake made a small sound. "That's it," Daniel said. "That's the entire mechanism. My sister stopped asking me to be quiet." 9:14. "Released you," Alexander said. "Released you from what?" "From a promise." "What promise? What are you?" Daniel said without turning around. "Do you want to do this, or should I?" "I'll do it," Eleanor said. She stood up. It was the first time she had stood all night. She'd come into that hall at 6:40 and sat down at 6:51, and she had not moved from that chair through the champagne in her face and the ring off her finger and 8 minutes of a microphone, and now she stood up, and 400 people watched a woman in a plain dress with dried champagne on the collar and her mother's wrap around her shoulders get to her feet. Nobody in that room was pitying her anymore. That was the thing. Somewhere in the last 20 minutes, it had simply stopped being available. In 2019, Eleanor said, Daniel read the Draper filings and called me and told me he thought there was a problem. I asked him not to pursue it. "Eleanor," Alexander said. "Eleanor." He said, "This is going to be worse in 5 years than it is now." "Eleanor, stop." I said, "Daniel, please, he's my husband." She looked at Alexander. "And my brother, who has never in his life let anything go, let it go, for me. And do you know what you said to me that year at Christmas? Alexander's mouth was open. You said, Eleanor said, your brother's finally learning to stay in his lane. Gordon Reese put his face in his hand. You thought you'd beaten him, Eleanor said. That's what I couldn't get past. It wasn't even that you did it. It's that you thought you'd won. You spent 6 years believing you'd outmaneuvered Daniel Caldwell. Her voice was still level. Alexander, I begged him on my knees in a kitchen in Brookline. That's what happened. That's what 6 years of your genius was. 9:15. Victoria was staring at Daniel. Caldwell, she said. Nobody answered her. Caldwell, she said again. Daniel Caldwell. Caldwell Reyes. Her voice had gone strange and flat. You're Caldwell Reyes. Daniel looked at her for the first time. Yes, he said. You put me on a calendar once, Daniel said. March 2022. 45 minutes his office and it got moved 4 times and then it got killed. You sent the email that killed it. It was a very good email. You wrote, Alex sends his apologies and hopes to reconnect in the new year. And I've thought about that email a number of times since. Victoria Blake's hand came up over her mouth. You didn't know, Daniel said. It wasn't a question. I could tell from the email. It was too polite. I didn't. I know, Daniel said. And there was nothing in it. No cruelty at all. And somehow that was the worst thing anyone said to her all night. Nobody tells the assistant. That's why they use one. Victoria sat back down. She sat down without meaning to the way Alexander had, and she put both hands on the edge of the table, and she was breathing wrong. 9:16. Vicky, Alexander said. She didn't look up. Vicky, look at me. Don't, Eleanor said. This is between... Alexander, don't. Eleanor's voice sharpened for the first time all evening, and the sharpness wasn't for him. Do not touch her right now. Not in front of these people. Not while she's like that. He stopped, and Victoria Blake's head came up and she looked at Eleanor Whitmore with an expression that nobody at that table would ever be able to describe. Why? She said. Why would you do that? Because you're 29, Eleanor said, and there are 400 people in this room, and every one of them is going to be telling this story on Monday, and if he touches your shoulder right now, that's the photograph. That's the whole rest of your life. Him touching your shoulder while you cry. Victoria's mouth shook. You threw a drink in my face, Eleanor said. You took my ring off my finger. It's in your left hand. You've been holding it for 38 minutes. Victoria looked down. Her fist was closed. She hadn't known. She opened her hand, and Eleanor's wedding ring was sitting in her palm, with a red line pressed into the skin around it. I don't want it, Eleanor said. What? Keep it. Eleanor's voice was perfectly steady. I mean that. It's not a punishment, and it's not a joke. I don't want it, and if I take it back right now, 400 people will watch me take it back, and that's a moment I'd rather not give them. She held Victoria's eyes. Put it in your bag. Throw it in the river. Sell it. It's about $9,000. He financed it. Victoria stared at her. He what? 36 months, Eleanor said. 2016. He had the money by then. He financed it anyway because he liked the cash flow. She almost smiled. Ask him. Go on, he's right there. Ask him if he financed the ring. Victoria turned her head slowly and looked at Alexander Whitmore. Alexander said nothing. And that right there was the last thing inside Victoria Blake came off its hinges. 9:18. You, she said. Vicky. You told me she was cut off. Her voice came out of her like something tearing. You told me. In Chicago, you sat on the end of the bed and you told me her family threw her out, and I held your hand, Alex. I sat there and held your hand while you told me how hard it was carrying a woman who had nowhere else to go. Victoria, keep your voice down. Her father just walked in here and the whole room stood up. 400 people heard that. You said he was some retired guy in Boston, Victoria said. You said that tonight. You said that at this table 40 minutes ago. She was crying and she wasn't wiping it, and she had stopped caring about $1,100 of anything. Alex, look at me. Look at me. Did you know? Did I know what? Did you know he was coming? Silence. No, Alexander said. Then why, Victoria said, did you pick tonight? And that was the question. That was the actual question, the one Eleanor had put in front of her 24 minutes earlier, and she hadn't been able to pick up, and now here it was in her own mouth, and she watched Alexander Whitmore's face while he decided whether to answer it. "Because I thought he wouldn't," Alexander said. 9:19. "Say that again," Daniel Caldwell said. "I said." "No, say it again, slowly. I want the room to have it." "Danny, say it." "I picked tonight," Alexander said, "because I thought he wouldn't come." Daniel nodded. "There it is," he said. He turned to the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. There were 400 people in there, and you could have heard a fork. "He picked the Whitfield," Daniel said. "He picked my grandmother's gala. He picked the one night a year when every person in this room who's ever loaned him money is sitting in the same building, and he did it because he was certain my father wouldn't be here." He looked back at Alexander. "You didn't do this to Eleanor. Everybody's going to say you did this to Eleanor. You did this to us, in our house, on the assumption that we wouldn't show up for her." Somebody in the back said, "Jesus." "And here's what I need you to understand," Daniel said, "because I don't think you have yet, and I've watched you not understand it for about 9 minutes now." He took a step in. "My father hasn't missed this gala since 1971. Alexander Whitmore's face went slack. 55 years, Daniel said. "He came the year after his heart surgery. He came the year my grandmother died 11 days after the funeral. He has been in this building on the 3rd Saturday of July every single year of your entire life." Daniel's voice stayed absolutely level. "He skipped it 6 times, 2016, 2017, 2018, 19, 20, 21, 6 years running. Do you know why?" Daniel, Eleanor said quietly. "Don't. He should hear it." "Daniel, Ellie should hear it." Daniel didn't take his eyes off Alexander. "He stopped coming because you started, because he couldn't sit in his mother's building and listen to you tell 400 people that nobody ever handed you anything, and his daughter had asked him not to say a word about it, and he's a man who cannot sit in a chair and eat chicken while somebody lies about his own mother's money to his own face." Daniel paused. "So he gave you the room. For 6 years. He gave you his mother's building 6 years running because his daughter asked him to." 9:20. Alexander Whitmore turned and looked at William Caldwell. The old man was sitting down now in Alexander's chair, with his hands folded on the head of a cane he did not need, and he was looking back. "You never said anything," Alexander said. "No," William said. 6 years. 6 years. "You never once." "Alexander." The old man's voice was thin and dry, and it carried anyway. "I have 319 employees at the firm. I have known the last 4 governors of this state, and for 6 years my daughter asked me for one thing." He shrugged very slightly. "One thing in 10 years of marriage. That's all she ever asked me for. Do you understand what that means?" Alexander shook his head. "It means she was ashamed," William said. "Not of you, for you. She was ashamed for you, and she couldn't stand to watch me watch you do it." He turned his head. "Elle, was that it?" "Yes," Eleanor said. "There it is," William said and looked away. And that was when Alexander Whitmore's face finally came apart. Not at the phone, not at Daniel, not at service, not at Sterling Bright, not at 400 people watching him with their hands in their laps. At an 81-year-old man saying there it is and looking away, 9:21. "I loved her," Alexander said. Nobody said anything. "I did," his voice was going. "I did. Whatever you all think you saw tonight, whatever Danny's got in a folder somewhere, I loved her, Alexander, Eleanor said. "Don't." "I did." "You read a book," Eleanor said. He stopped. 19 years ago, you read a book in 3 nights so that a woman at a dinner party would think you were the kind of man who'd already read it," Eleanor said. "And then you sat across from me and talked about it for 40 minutes, and I went home and sat in my car, and I thought he doesn't know who I am. That was the happiest I have ever been in my life." Her voice finally moved. "That's what you took. Not 10 years. Not the house. You took the 1 hour in my whole life when somebody looked at me and didn't see a door." Margaret Caldwell closed her eyes. "And the worst part," Eleanor said. "The part I could not get past in November in the garden in 40 minutes with no coat on is that you did it well. You picked the right book. You did the work. You stayed up 3 nights." She was crying now openly, and she did not stop talking. "That's what kills me. If you'd been lazy about it, I could have hated you. But you were good, Alexander. You were so good at pretending to be a man who'd have been worth it." The Whitfield Grand Hall was silent. 400 people and one waiter named Marcus standing by the kitchen doors with a tray of desserts nobody would ever eat, and a manager who had stopped trying to stop him. 10 years, Eleanor said. 10 years of a man telling me nobody handed him anything while I sat there and held the door open behind my back so he wouldn't feel it. 9:23. "Eleanor," Alexander said. "No." "Eleanor, please." "No." "Eleanor." And he went down. He actually went down one knee in front of 400 people in a suit on the floor of Constance Caldwell's ballroom, and it was the most honest thing he did all night, and it was still somehow a performance, and everybody in that room knew it, including him. "Eleanor, please, not like this, not in front of—" "Get up," Eleanor said. "Please." "Alexander, get up off the floor." She looked down at him. "You told me 20 minutes ago not to humiliate you in this room. I didn't. I haven't said one word to anyone but you." Her voice was steady again. "You did all of it. Every single thing that's happened to you tonight, you did with your own mouth at a microphone on purpose, because you thought an old man was staying home." Victoria Blake watched Alexander Whitmore kneel on the floor and beg his wife. And something in her face at the very end wasn't heartbreak. It was recognition. "Oh," she said softly. Eleanor turned. "You never were going to," Victoria said. It wasn't a question. She wasn't even talking to Alexander. She was looking at Eleanor. "Were you?" "There was never a night where he was going to pick me. It was always—" "No," Eleanor said. "There wasn't." "How long did you know that?" "Since Chicago," Eleanor said. "Since he told you my family cut me off." She looked at the girl from Bayonne with something that was not pity and was not triumph. "Victoria, a man doesn't lie to a woman he's leaving his wife for. He doesn't have to. He lies to a woman he's using, and the lie he picks tells you exactly what he thinks she's worth." She paused. "He told you I was poor. That's what he thought would keep you." Victoria Blake made a sound like a door closing. 9:24. Daniel Caldwell put his hand out, palm up without looking, and Ben Oyalaran, who had come through the doors 90 seconds earlier and had been standing at the back of the room the entire time, walked up and put a phone in it. Alexander saw his own general counsel put a phone in Daniel Caldwell's hand. "Ben," he said from the floor. "Ben. Ben." Ben Oyalaran did not look at him. "Alex," Daniel said, "you should probably stand up now." "What is that?" "Stand up first." "What is that, Daniel?" Daniel Caldwell turned the phone around so his brother-in-law could see the screen. Alexander Whitmore read it from one knee, and then he said very quietly, in a voice nobody in that room had ever heard him use, "Oh God." 9:25. "Stand up," Daniel said again. "I'm not going to say it a fourth time." Alexander Whitmore got off the floor. It took him 2 tries. His hand went out for the back of a chair, and the chair was occupied by an 81-year-old man who did not move to help him, and he found the table edge instead and came up on that. "Read it again," Daniel said, out loud. "No. Alex, I'm not going to stand in this room and read." "Then I will," Ben Oyalaran said. Alexander turned his head so fast, something in his neck went. Ben Oyalaran was 44 years old. He had been Alexander Whitmore's general counsel for 6 years. He had written the man's prenup, his shareholder agreement, his employment contracts, and the letter that fired a woman in Newark in 2021 that he had thought about roughly once a week ever since. He had a wife and a 9-year-old and a mortgage in Montclair, and he had not slept properly since February. "Ben," Alexander said. "Ben, don't." 9:17 p.m., Ben said. "Sender Sterling Bright Capital Office of the General Partner. Recipients the Board of Directors of Whitmore Holdings copy to Council." "Ben." "Subject line," Ben said. "Withdrawal of support and notice of cooperation." Somewhere behind them a woman said, "Oh my God," into her hand. "Read the body," Daniel said. Daniel, that's enough, Eleanor said. That's enough, her voice cut. Ben has a 9-year-old. Don't make him do it in front of 400 people so it's on him instead of you. Ben Oyalaran looked at her. He had spent 6 years in that man's building, and Alexander's wife had come to the office maybe 4 times, and every single time she had learned somebody's name, and he had never once thought about why until right this second. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me, Eleanor said. You should have called somebody in 2021. Ben's face went red, and he took it. He just stood there and took it. 9:26. Cooperation, Alexander said. His voice had gone strange and light. It says cooperation. It does, Daniel said. Cooperation with what? Alex. Cooperation with what? Daniel. You know with what? I want you to say it. Daniel Caldwell put the phone in his jacket pocket. No, he said. That's the part you're going to have to say yourself, eventually, to a person with a court reporter in the room, and you're going to have to say it slowly, and they're going to ask you to spell things. Alexander Whitmore laughed. That was the thing nobody was expecting. He laughed one bark of it ugly and disbelieving, and Victoria Blake flinched at the sound because she had never heard it before, and she had thought she knew every sound he made. You've got nothing, he said. You've got nothing, Danny. You've got filings from 2019 and a girl and a hotel receipt. Draper, Daniel said. Alexander stopped laughing. Say something else, Daniel said. Go on, say another sentence. I've got about 9 words I can put in the middle of it, and you'll stop, and I'd like the room to watch me do it. Alexander said nothing. Draper, Daniel said again, 2019. You want to know what I saw? It took me 40 minutes. It wasn't buried, Alex. That's what I keep trying to get across to you, and you're not hearing it. You didn't hide anything. Not her, not the receipts, not Draper. You didn't hide it because it never once occurred to you that anybody would look. That's not... Because nobody ever had, Daniel said. 9:27. Gordon Reese stood up. He didn't say anything. He put his napkin on his chair, and he took his wife's arm, and Barbara Reese got up with him, and the two of them walked out of the Whitfield Grand Hall without looking at table 14. Then table 9 went. Then the whole sterling bright table 6 of them all at once, and one of them, a young analyst named Priya Raman, who had absolutely no idea what any of this was about, whispered, "What's happening?" And her boss said, "Get your coat," in a voice she'd never heard from him. "Where are they going?" Alexander said. Nobody answered him. "Where is everybody going?" "Alex," Ben said. "They're not leaving the gala. They're leaving you. It's different. Look at the room." Alexander Whitmore looked. Nobody had left the far side of the ballroom. Nobody had left the back. 400 people were still there, still sitting, still watching, and the only tables emptying were the ones close enough to be in a photograph with him. He understood it in about a second and a half. He was a smart man. That was never the problem. "Oh," he said. 9:28. Victoria Blake stood up. "I'm going to go," she said. "Sit down," Alexander said. "I'm going to go, Alex." "Sit down, Victoria. If you walk out of here right now with all these..." "With all these what?" She turned on him. "With all these people watching Alex. Alex Honey." And the honey came out of her like a knife she didn't know she'd been carrying. "There's nobody left to watch. Look at your table. Look at it." He looked. Table 14 had 10 seats. It had William Caldwell in one of them, and Margaret and Eleanor and Catherine Doyle, and Daniel standing behind, and Ben, and 6 empty chairs with napkins on them. "I've been running your calendar for 3 years and 8 months, Victoria said. "You know what my job actually is. My job is knowing who takes your call. That's it. That's the whole job." She was shaking. "At 6 o'clock tonight, 400 people took your call. It's 9:28. Do you want me to tell you the number now?" "Vicky, 2, she said. "Me and the girl at the car service, and she has to." Catherine Doyle said very quietly, "Good Lord," 9:29. "You," Victoria said and turned to Eleanor. Eleanor waited. "You knew," Victoria said. "You knew the whole time. 11 months. You sat there and you watched me build my whole..." "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me?" "Yes." It came out of Victoria at a volume that turned heads at the back wall. Yes, God, yes. You think I'd have you. Think I'd have signed up for this. You think I wanted to be the woman standing in a ballroom with 400 people watching me hold another woman's wedding ring. Eleanor Whitmore was quiet for a second. No, she said. You're right. I'm sorry. Victoria stopped dead. What? I said you're right and I'm sorry. Eleanor's voice didn't waver. I should have called you in March. I thought about it. I had your number. I'd had it for years. You'd sent me 100 emails about his travel. She paused. I picked up the phone twice. Why didn't you? Because I wanted him to do it in front of everybody, Eleanor said. The table went silent. That's the truth, Eleanor said. That's the actual truth, and I'm going to say it out loud once, and then I'm going to live with it. I could have stopped tonight. Any day for 11 months I could have stopped tonight. I didn't because I wanted every person in this room to see him do it with his own mouth. And Victoria, you were standing in the way of that, and I let you stand there. She met her eyes. So no, don't apologize to me tonight. I'm not owed it. I used you the same 3 months he used you for 3 years. And I'm not going to stand here and pretend the arithmetic came out clean just because he's worse. Nobody moved. Margaret Caldwell looked at her daughter with an expression that was not entirely approval and was something much bigger than it. Victoria Blake stared at Eleanor for a long moment. That's the first honest thing anybody's said to me in 3 years, she said. I know. I hate you. That's fair, Eleanor said. No, I mean it. I hate you. I'm going to hate you for about 10 years. Victoria's voice cracked all the way through. And then I'm going to be 40, and I'm going to be telling this story at somebody's kitchen table, and I'm going to be on your side, and I hate that most of all. She picked up her bag. Vicky, Alexander said. She didn't look at him. That was the thing. She got the strap over her shoulder, and she looked at Eleanor and at Margaret and at the old man in the chair. And she did not look at Alexander Whitmore, and it took her about 4 seconds to walk out of his life. 9:30. Then she stopped. She turned around. Alex, she said. Vicky. The Draper thing, Victoria said. In 2019, you had me courier a folder to a man in Greenwich on a Sunday. You told me it was a birthday present. Ben Oyalaran's head came up so fast, his glasses moved. Daniel Caldwell said very calmly, Ms. Blake. I remember the address, Victoria said. I remember it because I had to take a train and then a cab, and it cost me $61, and he never reimbursed me. Ms. Blake, Daniel said, don't say another word in this room. Why not? Because there are 400 people in it, Daniel said, and about 6 of them are lawyers, and I want you to say the next part to a person who's on your side. He took a card out of his pocket. Do not come to my firm. We're adverse to you. Call this woman. She's better than me, and she'll cost you nothing, and she'll tell you inside of 10 minutes whether you're a witness or something else. Victoria took the card. She looked at it. Why are you helping me? She said. I'm not, Daniel said. I'm making sure that when you tell this story, nobody can say you were coached. Victoria Blake almost laughed. God, she said, you people are terrifying. Yes, Margaret Caldwell said pleasantly. Go home, dear. Eat something. It's going to be a long year. 9:31, she went, and Alexander Whitmore watched the woman he had spent 3 years and 8 months lying to walk out of a ballroom, holding his general counsel's worst nightmare in her left hand, along with a $9,000 ring he had financed over 36 months. Ben, he said. Alex. Ben, what was in the Draper folder? Ben Oyalaran looked at him for a long moment. You know what was in the folder, he said. You packed it. 9:32. The Whitfield Grand Hall started to empty. Not fast. That was what people always got wrong when they told it later. There was no stampede, no chairs going over. It was slow, and it was polite, and it was the worst thing anyone there had ever seen. Table by table, people got their coats. They said goodnight to the committee. They complimented the flowers. And every single one of them on the way out walked past table 14, and every single one of them stopped and said something to Eleanor, not to Alexander. He was standing 4 feet away. Eleanor, a woman said, it's been too long. Miriam. Lunch. I mean it this time. I'd like that. Eleanor. An old man with a cane worse than William's. Your grandmother would have cleared this room herself. She'd have done it in 1968, Eleanor said. She had better legs than me. He laughed, patted her hand, and walked past Alexander Whitmore like he was a coat rack. 41 of them. Catherine Doyle counted because Catherine Doyle counts things when she's upset. 41 people stopped at that table in 11 minutes, and not one of them said one word to the man who had been the most important person in that ballroom at 8:41. They're not even angry, Alexander said. No, Eleanor said. They're not angry, Eleanor. They're being pleasant. Yes. Why aren't they angry? Because you're not theirs to be angry at, Eleanor said. You never were. You were mine. That's the part you never understood about these people, Alexander. They didn't like you. They liked me being married to you. He looked at her. That's not... Diane Foster has known me since I was 6, Eleanor said. Gordon Reese held me at my christening. He hated you from the first minute. He told me so at our engagement party in the coat room, and I told him he was being a snob, and he said, "Sweetheart, I hope I am." She stopped. 9 years I thought about that sentence. 9:35. William Caldwell stood up. He did it slowly, using the cane properly for the first time all night, and Eleanor moved to help him, and he waved her off. Alexander, he said. The room, what was left of it, went quiet again. Yes, sir, Alexander said, and the sir came out of him automatically from somewhere 20 years back, and Daniel's mouth did something complicated. I want to say one thing to you, and then I'm going to take my daughter home, William said. Are you listening? Yes. In 2016, you sat at my table and told 9 people that nobody handed you anything. The old man's voice was mild. I've thought about that for 10 years, and I want you to know I never once minded the lie. Alexander blinked. That's not what upset me, William said. Men lie about money. It's the second oldest thing men do. I've lied about money. He shifted his hands on the cane. What upset me was that you said it in front of Eleanor. You said it in front of her at my table while she sat there with her hands in her lap because you had already decided that she wouldn't say anything. He paused. And you were right, she didn't. And that's when I knew what you were. Mr. Caldwell, you didn't just lie to a room, William said. You made my daughter into somebody who had to keep your lie for you, at her own father's table. You made her an accomplice in her own erasure at Christmas over potatoes. He nodded slowly. That's the thing, son. That's the thing I've been carrying for 10 years. Not the money. The potatoes. 9:37. I'm going to say the rest quickly, William said, because I'm 81 and I want to sit down again. Nobody laughed. You asked my daughter for one thing tonight, he said. You told her not to humiliate you in this room. She didn't. She hasn't said a single word to a single person in here except you. Do you understand that? 11 months, 400 people, not one call to a reporter, not one word to Diane, not one word to Gordon, who would have crawled through glass for the chance. He looked at Alexander. My daughter kept her mouth shut for you tonight while you did it to her. That's the last thing she'll ever do for you, and you're never going to know how much it cost. William, and I want you to understand what she did not do, William said, because you're going to spend a great deal of time in the next 2 years telling yourself a story about a vengeful woman, and I want to take that away from you before you build it. Dad, Eleanor said. No, he gets this. Dad, please. Eleanor. The old man didn't turn around. You've been protecting him for 10 years. You can stop for 90 seconds. The ballroom was quiet. She didn't touch you, William said. Not once. She didn't call a bank. She didn't call a board member. She didn't put a word in anyone's ear. And Alexander, look at me. I want you to hear this. I asked her to. In March, I asked her. I sat in her kitchen and I said, let me make 3 phone calls and this man will be selling boats in Florida by August. He let it sit. She said no. Alexander Whitmore's mouth opened. She said no. William said, and I said why, and she said because then it's mine and not his. 9:39. Alexander turned and looked at his wife. Elle, he said. Don't. You said no, Alexander. You said no. Yes, Eleanor said. Why? And Eleanor Whitmore, 41 years old, in a plain dress with champagne dried on the collar and her mother's wrap around her shoulders, and a bare white line where a ring had been for 10 years, looked at her husband and told him the truth. "Because I wanted to know," she said. "Know what? Whether you'd do it anyway." Her voice was perfectly steady, and it was the worst thing in the room. "I took my hands off in November. That's all I did. I stopped saying give him room, and I sat back and I waited to see what you'd do with a year of nobody helping you." She stopped. "And Alexander, I want you to understand something because I don't think you will for a long time. I wasn't waiting to see if you'd fail." He stared at her. "I was waiting to see if you'd notice," she said. 9:40. 11 months, Eleanor said. 11 months with nobody quietly making a call for you. Marcus started sending you notes in April, didn't he? 2-page notes. You never read them. Ben came into your office in May. Alexander, he stood in your office and said the word Draper out loud, and you told him to stay in his lane. Ben Oyalaran's eyes closed. "The Newark facility got a letter in June," Eleanor said. "Diane Foster asked you a question at a lunch in June, and you laughed at her." Her voice didn't rise once. 11 months and 11 different people put a hand up, and you never wondered why. Not once. Not one time in 11 months did it occur to you to ask why everything had suddenly gotten harder. "I thought, say it." "I thought it was the market," Alexander said. Catherine Doyle made a sound. "The market," Eleanor said. "Eleanor, everybody had a bad year. 11 people, Alexander." And there it was. There was the crack, the only one all night, and it came out of her like something breaking underwater. 11 people tried to save you, and you thought it was the market. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I didn't destroy you. I let go of you. And you didn't feel it. You didn't feel the difference between a hand on your back and no hand on your back for 11 months because you never knew the hand was there. Alexander Whitmore stood in his mother-in-law's mother's ballroom and had nothing to say. "That's the whole marriage," Eleanor said quietly. "Right there. That's 10 years in one sentence. You never felt my hand." 9:42. "I'll fix it," he said. "What?" "I'll fix it." He was nodding. He'd started nodding and he couldn't stop. "Elle, listen. I can fix this. Sterling's a phone call. Marcus is a phone call. I'll go see Diane in the morning. Ben help me here. What's the exposure actual number?" "Alex," Ben said. "What's the exposure?" "I resigned at 9:14, Ben said. Silence. "You what?" "I sent it from the lobby," Ben said. "Before I came in. Before I knew he'd read it out." He nodded at Daniel. "I want that in the record, by the way. I resigned before I knew. That's important to me, and it's going to be important to my daughter someday." "Ben." 6 years, Ben Oyalaran said. "I wrote the Newark letters. I'm going to be answering for that for the rest of my career, and I'm the one who typed them." His voice shook, and he let it. "And I did it because you were the smartest guy I ever met, and you made me feel like I was in the room. That's it. That's the whole reason. You made me feel like I was in the room. Alex and I sold 9 years of my license for it." He turned and walked out. 9:43. "Daniel?" Alexander said. "No." "Danny, please. 90 seconds, please. You and me outside 90 seconds. Alex, please." Daniel Caldwell looked at him for a long moment. "All right," he said. Eleanor said, "Daniel, 90 seconds, L." And Daniel Caldwell walked 8 feet away with his brother-in-law and said something to him that nobody else heard. It lasted about 40 seconds. Alexander did all the talking fast, low, both hands moving. Daniel listened with his hands in his pockets. Then Daniel said something short, maybe 9 or 10 words, and Alexander Whitmore stopped talking and stood absolutely still. He never told anyone what Daniel said. Not in the deposition, not in the 2 interviews, not to his brother, not to his mother, not to the reporter who offered him money for it in the spring. Whatever it was, he stopped talking, and he didn't say another word for 11 minutes. 9:45. "Mom?" Eleanor said. "Can we go?" "Yes." "Is the car? The car's been here since 8, Margaret said. Your father wouldn't let him leave." Eleanor laughed. It surprised her. It came out wet and small and real, and Catherine Doyle grabbed her hand under the wrap and held on. "Elle," Catherine said. "Don't." "I'm going to say it." "Catherine." 26 years. Catherine Doyle said. 26 years, and I've never once known what you were thinking, and tonight I sat next to you for 3 hours and you told me not to look at the doors. Her voice went. You couldn't even tell me. Eleanor closed her eyes. I know, she said. Why? Because you'd have looked at the doors, Eleanor said. And Catherine, if you'd looked at the doors, he'd have looked at the doors. And if he'd looked at the doors, he wouldn't have given the speech. Catherine Doyle sat back very slowly. Jesus, Eleanor, she said. I know. Jesus. I know, Eleanor said. Ask me in 5 years if I'm sorry. I'll give you a better answer than I have tonight. 9:47. They left through the front. That was Margaret's decision, and it was not up for discussion. Eleanor said something about the service corridor, and Margaret Caldwell said, absolutely not, in a voice that had ended arguments in that building since 1984. And that was the end of it. So Eleanor Caldwell walked out through the main doors of the Whitfield Grand Hall on her father's arm past 160 people who were still there, and every one of them stood up. Not applause. Nobody clapped. It wasn't that kind of thing. They just stood up. 160 people at a charity gala in New York City rose out of their chairs in silence for a woman in a plain dress with dried champagne on her collar, and Marcus the waiter stood by the kitchen doors with his tray, and he put it down on a service table so he could stand up straighter, and he was 22 years old, and he never forgot it for the rest of his life. Alexander Whitmore watched them stand. He was still in the middle of the room. Nobody had asked him to leave. That was the thing that finally got him. The thing that finished it. Nobody threw him out. Nobody made a scene. Nobody said one hard word to him after 9:43. They just stood up for somebody else in the same room with him standing in it. 9:51. At the doors, Eleanor stopped. She turned around. She looked back across her great-grandmother's ballroom at the man she'd been married to for 10 years, standing alone by table 14 with 6 empty chairs and a cracked champagne glass and a plate of chicken nobody had touched. Alexander, she said. He looked up. Yes, and God help him, there was hope in it. 400 people had watched him die in 90 minutes, and there was still hope in it, and that Catherine Doyle said later was the single saddest sound she ever heard a human being make. You asked me at the table how long I'd known, Eleanor said. You asked it twice, and I never answered you properly. 11 months about her, Eleanor said. 1 hour about you. He didn't understand. She watched him not understand. The night we met, she said, in Cambridge. I sat in my car in the driveway for 40 minutes, and I was so happy I couldn't breathe. And then I went inside and I called my mother and I said, Mom, I met somebody, and he doesn't know who I am. Margaret Caldwell, on her daughter's other side, did not move. And my mother said, Eleanor, sweetheart. Eleanor's voice was perfectly clear across 60 feet of silent ballroom. Everybody knows who you are. Alexander Whitmore's face went white. I hung up on her, Eleanor said. I hung up on my own mother, and I didn't speak to her for 2 weeks, and I married you 14 months later. She pulled the wrap tighter. So don't ask me how long I knew. I've known since the first night. I just wanted it so badly that I spent 10 years agreeing not to. And Eleanor Caldwell walked out of the Whitfield Grand Hall, and the doors closed behind her, and they did not open again. They got as far as the car before Eleanor Caldwell stopped being fine. 9:54. 14 minutes since she'd stood up at table 14. 3 minutes since 160 people had risen out of their chairs in silence. 40 seconds since her father had handed her into the back seat like she was 9 years old. And then the door shut and the noise of the world went off like a switch, and Eleanor put both hands over her face and made a sound that Margaret Caldwell had heard exactly once before in a hospital corridor in 1997 out of a boy who was not coming home. Nobody said anything. Her mother did not reach for her. That was the correct call, and Margaret made it in half a second, the way she made everything, because 41 years of knowing that particular child had taught her that touching Eleanor while she was breaking made her stop breaking, and Eleanor had done enough stopping for 1 decade. So Margaret Caldwell sat 6 inches away from her daughter and folded her hands and let her. It lasted about 90 seconds. Then Eleanor sat up, wiped her face with the flat of her hand, and said, I'm going to need the car to not smell like this. It's leather, William said from the front. It doesn't hold anything. Dad, nothing holds anything, the old man said. That's the good news about cars. Eleanor laughed. It came out wrong and wet, and it was still a laugh, and Margaret closed her eyes for 1 second in the dark. 10:02. "Elle," Daniel said. He was in the jump seat with his knees somewhere around his chin, 6'4" in a car built for people who don't work for a living. "I need to say one work thing, and then I'm done for the night." "Say it." "Your phone's going to start at about 6 tomorrow morning." "I know." "No, listen. Not reporters. Reporters I can eat. I mean friends." He watched her. 41 people stopped at that table tonight. Every one of them is going to call you tomorrow, and every one of them is going to want the story, and they're going to want it in a nice voice with concern. And Elle, I need you to understand that the concern is real, and they still want the story. Both things are true. What do I say so? Nothing. Daniel, I'm not going to sit in a house for a year, not. Elle. He leaned forward. I'm not telling you to hide. I'm telling you that for the next 11 months, every single sentence you say about that man goes in a deposition. Every one. Including the ones you say to Catherine at a kitchen table at midnight with a glass of wine because Catherine will be a witness because she was sitting next to you. Eleanor was quiet. So here's what you say, Daniel said. Somebody calls you, say, thank you for calling. I'm all right. How's your mother? That's it. That's it. 11 months. How's your mother? And if they push, then they weren't calling about you, Daniel said. And you've learned something for free. 10:05. Danny, Eleanor said. Yeah. What did you say to him? Daniel Caldwell looked out the window. 40 seconds, Eleanor said. You walked 8 feet away with my husband, and you talked to him for 40 seconds, and he stopped speaking for 11 minutes. What did you say to him? You don't want it. I do. You don't, Daniel said, and there was something in his voice she had not heard since they were children. I've said one genuinely cruel thing in my life, and I said it tonight, and I'd do it again, and I'd like to not have my sister carrying it for me. Please. Eleanor looked at her brother for a long moment. All right, she said, and that was the end of it. She never asked again. 22 years later, at Daniel Caldwell's funeral, his widow would tell Eleanor that he'd said it exactly once at 3 a.m. in year 9 of their marriage, and that she had never repeated it to a living soul either. 10:11. The story went up at 11:47 that night. It wasn't a paper. It wasn't a wire. It was a 19-second video shot by a woman at table 31 who had been filming the flowers for her sister-in-law and had swung the phone around out of pure animal instinct at the exact moment Victoria Blake stood up with a glass in her hand. It caught all of it. The toast. The silence. 400 people sitting on their hands. And it caught at the very end in the last 3 seconds the back of a plain dress at table 14, not moving. By Sunday morning, it had 11 million views. Catherine Doyle, 7:15 a.m. before the coffee. Are you sitting down, Catherine? Have you seen it? I've seen it. 11 million Catherine. Eleanor's voice was very calm. How's your mother? There was a pause on the line about 4 seconds long. Then Catherine Doyle said, Oh, you absolute Daniel got to you. Daniel got to me. My mother's fine, Catherine said. My mother's 91 and she's seen the video and she says you should have thrown the chair. 10:14. Sterling Bright pulled the facility on Monday at 9:04 in the morning. Not a call. A letter from a firm to a firm, and the sentence that mattered was the fourth one, and it used the phrase in light of information brought to our attention, and did not say by whom, and it did not have to. By Wednesday, there were 4 of them. By Friday, there were 9, and Marcus Hale, the CFO, who had called 3 times at 8:51 and 8:54 and 8:58, and then had stopped calling, forever resigned in a letter that ran 2 paragraphs and was in the opinion of everyone who read it. The politest execution in the history of American corporate correspondence. They're not even angry, Alexander Whitmore said to a lawyer in a conference room on a Thursday. The lawyer looked at him. Alex, the lawyer said. They're not angry because they don't know you. Nobody knew you. You know how I know. 200 people gave you money, and not one of them has called me to yell. That's not how it goes when somebody's been betrayed. That's how it goes when somebody's been sold something. 10:17. Victoria Blake sat down with a woman named Ruth Okonjo 11 days after the gala. She had called the number on the card on a Tuesday morning from a bus, which was a detail she'd have died before mentioning, and Ruth Okonjo had said, "Come in at 4," and had not asked a single question on the phone. "Before you say anything," Ruth said, "I want to explain the shape of this. Can I do that?" "Okay. There are 3 things you might be. You might be a witness, you might be a target, or you might be a person who feels terrible and hasn't actually done anything, which is the most common thing in the world, and nobody believes it about themselves." Ruth folded her hands. "We're going to find out which one you are today, and then I'm going to tell you straight in a voice you don't like, and you're going to be able to sleep tonight either way. Sound all right?" Victoria's chin went. "Yeah," she said. "Good. Tell me about the folder." And Victoria Blake told her about the folder. $61, a train and a cab, a Sunday in 2019, a man in Greenwich who took it at the door without saying thank you and closed the door before she was off the step. Ruth Okonjo listened without writing anything down. "Did you open it?" she said. "No." "Did he ever tell you what was in it?" "He said it was a birthday present." "Did you believe him?" Victoria opened her mouth. And then she stopped and she sat in that chair for about 11 seconds, and Ruth Okonjo watched her do it and did not help her. "No," Victoria said. "Say the whole sentence." "No, I didn't believe him," her voice went. "I didn't believe him and I got on the train anyway." "All right," Ruth said. "That's the worst thing you're ever going to have to say out loud, and you just said it in 11 days. Most people take 9 years. She uncapped a pen. "You're a witness. Let's go to work." 10:21. The deposition was in March. 8 months after the gala, in a conference room in Midtown with a court reporter and 11 lawyers and a pitcher of water, nobody touched. Victoria Blake sat across a table from Alexander Whitmore for the first time since she'd walked out of his life holding another woman's wedding ring. He looked at her when she came in. She didn't look at him. Ruth had drilled it for 3 weeks. "You don't look at him, not once. He will make it very hard. And you don't look at him. Ms. Blake," his lawyer said, "how would you characterize your relationship with my client? I was his executive assistant for 3 years and 8 months. And personally, we were sleeping together." Somebody's pen stopped. "Ms. Blake, I understand this is—" "You asked," Victoria said. "That's the answer. I'm going to give you the answer every time, so you should think about which questions you want." Ruth Okonjo did not smile. Ruth Okonjo was a professional. "Ms. Blake, isn't it true that you were at the time of the events in question romantically motivated to see my client's marriage end?" "Yes. Yes. Yes." Victoria's voice was flat and clear. "I wanted him to leave her. I wanted it for 3 years and 8 months, and I'd have done almost anything to get it. And I want that on the record, because you're going to say it anyway, and I'd rather it come out of my mouth than yours." She paused. "But you're going to ask me about a folder in about 10 minutes, and none of what I just said changes the address in Greenwich." Alexander Whitmore put his hand over his mouth. "Ms. Blake." $61, Victoria said. "A train and a cab. February 3rd, 2019. It was a Sunday. He told me it was a birthday present." She looked at the court reporter, not at him, never at him. "It wasn't anybody's birthday. I checked the calendar. I ran the calendar. I was the calendar." 10:25. It ended the way those things end. Not with a verdict, not with handcuffs on a sidewalk. Nobody got a photograph. It ended with a settlement in November, 16 months after the gala, and a consent decree, and a number that got reported wrong in 3 places, and a 5-year bar that Alexander Whitmore agreed to without admitting anything, which is the standard American way of admitting everything. The company survived. That surprised people. It got bought cheap by a firm in Chicago that changed the name inside of 6 weeks, and the Newark facility stayed open, and Petey's kid still worked in the mailroom, and then in logistics, and then eventually ran a shift. Alexander Whitmore was not in any of it. "That's the part I don't think he'll survive," Daniel said at a kitchen table in Brookline in December. "Which part?" "That it's fine." Daniel turned his glass. Elle, I've taken 11 companies apart. Every time the guy at the top tells himself the same story. He says they need me. He says watch it burn without me. And then it doesn't burn. It just keeps going without him slightly better, and nobody calls. He looked up. That's the sentence. Nobody calls. Eleanor was quiet. Do you feel bad? Daniel said. No. Elle. I don't feel bad, Eleanor said. I feel tired, Daniel, and everybody keeps handing me bad because they don't have a word for tired. She pushed the glass away. 9 months of people telling me I must be so relieved. I'm not relieved. I'm 42 years old, and I don't know what I do on Tuesdays. 10/29. That was the winter nobody made a movie about. The video had 11 million views, and then it had 40, and then it had 112. And by February, there were 3 books being written, and one of them got a 2-page spread, and none of them ever got close to the actual thing, which was a woman sitting in a house in Brookline at 4 p.m. in January, not knowing what to do until dinner. I ironed a shirt today, Eleanor told Catherine. Whose shirt? Mine. Elle, you have people who... I know I have people, Eleanor said. I ironed it anyway. It took 40 minutes, and it's the only thing I did all day, and I was proud of it, Catherine. And I want you to sit with how that sounds. There was a silence. Are you asking me to come up there? Catherine said. No. Because I'll get in the car right now. Catherine. 27 years, Eleanor. You've never once asked me for anything. Not one time. Not when your brother, not in 97, not when your grandmother died, not for 11 months while that man... Catherine, ask me for something. Catherine Doyle's voice cracked all the way open. I'm 62 years old, Elle. Ask me for one thing before we're dead. Please. Eleanor Caldwell sat in her kitchen with the phone against her ear. Come up Thursday, she said. Yeah. Come up Thursday and don't bring anything and don't be kind to me. I can't take another kind person. I want somebody to be rude to me for 48 hours. Catherine Doyle blew her nose. Honey, she said, I have been waiting 27 years. 10:33. It started with a woman named Deb. Not a plan, not a foundation, not a vision, not a mission statement, none of the things that got printed later. It started because a woman named Deb Kaczmarek from Newark sent Eleanor Caldwell a letter on paper in an envelope with a stamp in March. It was 2 pages. It was written in ballpoint. It had one crossed-out line in it that she hadn't bothered to hide. Mrs. Whitmore, it said, and then Ms. Caldwell crossed out and rewritten. You don't know me. I got let go from the Newark facility in 2021. I saw the video. I'm not writing for money. I'm writing because I watched you sit there, and I need to tell somebody that I sat there too. I sat in a room with 3 men for 40 minutes, and I did not say one word, and I have hated myself for that for 4 years. I thought I was the only one. I am 54. Please don't write back if this is strange. Eleanor read it 11 times. Then she called Daniel. L. I need the name of whoever handled the Newark separations. Silence 4 seconds long. L. No. Daniel. Absolutely not. You're a party to a consent decree. You cannot go poking. I'm not poking anything. Eleanor's voice was very level. I want to know if she got paid. Who said Deb Kaczmarek? Who's Deb Kaczmarek? Who's Deb? She's the woman my husband fired in 2021 with a letter Ben Oyalaran typed, Eleanor said, and she wrote me a letter in ballpoint pen and told me not to write back. And Daniel, I've had 400 people stand up for me in a ballroom, and this is the only piece of mail I've gotten in 8 months that made me feel like a person. She stopped. I want to know if she got paid. That's it. If she got paid, I'll leave it. Daniel Caldwell was quiet for a long moment. She didn't get paid, he said. How do you know? Because nobody in that group got paid, Daniel said. There were 19 of them. It was a reduction in force that wasn't a reduction in force, and the paper was clean enough that nobody had a case worth taking. And Elle, I've known about it since February of last year, and I didn't tell you because it wasn't relevant to anything and because you had enough. Eleanor sat very still. 19, she said. Eleanor, 19 women. 14 women and 5 men, and Elle, listen to me. Give me the list, Eleanor said. 10:38. Absolutely not, said the lawyer. Absolutely not, said the second lawyer. Eleanor, said her father. Sit down. She did not sit down. 19 people, Eleanor said. 19 people lost their jobs so that a man could put a number on a slide, and every one of them signed a piece of paper in a room by themselves without a lawyer, and I want to know what it would cost to make that right. It's not a legal question, Daniel said. I didn't ask a legal question. I asked what it would cost, Eleanor said. William Caldwell, 82 years old, now sat at the end of that table with his hands on his cane and said absolutely nothing for about a minute and a half. Then he said, $4 million. Everybody turned. Dad, $4 million, William said. 19 people, 4 years of lost earnings health coverage, and enough left over that it isn't insulting. $4 million give or take, and you'd want a third person to run it because if it comes out of your hand, Eleanor, it's a bribe, and if it comes out of mine, it's a Caldwell doing a favor, and neither of those is what you want. Eleanor stared at her father. You've done the arithmetic, she said. I did it in February of last year, William said. Dad. You asked me not to touch him, the old man said. You didn't ask me not to count. 1042. It wasn't 4 million. It was 6.2 because Margaret got involved. And when Margaret Caldwell got involved, things stopped being a number and started being a program. They called it the Kaczmarek Fund for 11 days, and then Deb Kaczmarek called the office herself and said in a voice that had raised 3 kids and buried a husband, Absolutely not. Take my name off it. I'll sue you myself. And so they called it the second room. It came out of a sentence in her letter. I sat in a room with 3 men for 40 minutes and I did not say one word. The second room did one thing. It put a person in the room. Not a lawyer at first. A lawyer was too expensive and too frightening. And it turned out that most people didn't want one. Just a person. Somebody who'd been through it, who'd sit in the chair beside you while 3 men in a conference room slid a piece of paper across a table and who would say out loud at the right moment the single most powerful sentence in the American language, she'd like to take this home and read it. That was it. That was the entire product. 9 words. That's not a foundation, a consultant told them at a meeting in June. That's a service. Eleanor Caldwell's head came up. The room went cold in a way the consultant did not understand and never would. Say that again, she said. I just mean in terms of positioning, it's a service, not a key. Thank you, Eleanor said. That's the name, 1046. By the end of the second year, the second room had put a person in the chair 4,011 times. Not once did it stop a firing. It was never designed to. What it did was slower and stranger and much harder to explain to a donor. It changed what people signed. 11% of them didn't sign at all, 19% negotiated, and 61% signed exactly what they'd have signed anyway, but they signed it 2 days later at a kitchen table with the television off having read it. That's the whole thing, a reporter said. They still sign, most of them, Eleanor said. Then what's the point? Eleanor Caldwell looked at her for a second. The point, she said, is that nobody ever gets to tell them later that they didn't understand what was happening. That's it. That's it, Eleanor said. You want me to tell you we save people? We don't. We just make sure that when they walk out of that room, the thing that happened to them is something they know happened to them. She paused. I spent 10 years married to a man, and I knew from the first night, and I agreed not to. That's what I do now. I take away the agreeing not to. The reporter put her pen down. Ms. Caldwell, she said. Can I ask you one off the record? No, Eleanor said. 1051, 2 years to the month, the 3rd Saturday of July at the Whitfield Grand Hall at the 58th Metropolitan Charity Gala because Constance Caldwell had put $11 million in it in 1968. And the 3rd Saturday of July was the 3rd Saturday of July, and the world had not stopped turning. The difference was that this year Eleanor Caldwell was the one at the microphone. Not because of her name. That was the part that got argued about at 19 dinner parties. Diane Foster had proposed her in September, and 11 board members had voted yes and 2 had voted no, and one of the 2, a man named Whit Halloran, had said it out loud in the meeting. She's a Caldwell, we'd be handing it to her. And Diane Foster, 79 years old, had said, Whit, she's raised 6.2 and put a body in 4,000 chairs, and you've raised nothing, and your grandfather founded a bank. Sit down. Eleanor abstained. It was on the record. She'd walked out of the room for the vote and stood in a hallway for 9 minutes with her hands folded like a woman waiting for a diagnosis. 8:41 on a Saturday night. Dessert had not come out yet. "You're doing the thing," Catherine Doyle said. "What thing?" "The hands." Eleanor looked down. Her hands were folded in her lap. "Oh," she said. "Eleanor." Catherine leaned in. "You've got 160 seconds. Are you all right?" "I'm fine." "Elle." "Catherine, I'm fine." "You're sitting at table 14, Catherine said. Eleanor stopped. "I asked for it," she said. "I know you did. They tried to give me the head table. I said no." Eleanor's voice was very quiet. "I wanted the chair. Not Catherine, I'm not being dramatic. I wanted the actual chair. I wanted to sit in it once when nothing was happening." Catherine Doyle put her hand over her friend's hand on the tablecloth and did not say anything at all. 10:56. "There's something I have to tell you," Catherine said. "Don't." "Elle, Catherine, I'm on in 90 seconds, whatever it is." "He's here," Catherine said. Eleanor Caldwell did not move. "Where?" she said. "Back of the room, by the doors." "He's not sitting. He's Elle. He doesn't have a ticket. He's standing. They let him stand at the back because nobody knew what to do." "How long?" 20 minutes. Eleanor looked at her hands. "Do you want me to have him taken out?" Catherine said. "Because I will. I will do it myself. I will stand up right now and go get Gordon and we will." "No." "Eleanor." "No," Eleanor said. "Catherine, look at me. No." "Why?" And Eleanor Caldwell said something that Catherine Doyle thought about for the rest of her life. "Because he came to the back of a room and stood up," she said. 20 minutes, in a building he can't get a ticket to." She stood up. "That's not nothing. It's not enough, but it's not nothing, and I'm not going to be a person who can't tell the difference." 10:59. She spoke for 11 minutes. She did not mention Alexander Whitmore. She did not mention the video or the gala or the night, and everybody in the room knew she wouldn't. And everybody in the room was waiting for it anyway, and she stood up there and talked about a woman named Deb Kaczmarek from Newark, who wrote a letter in ballpoint pen with one crossed-out line she didn't bother to hide. "She told me not to write back," Eleanor said. "That's the line I can't get past." 2 pages, everything she'd been carrying for 4 years, and at the bottom she wrote, "Please don't write back if this is strange." 400 people were absolutely silent. "She apologized," Eleanor said, "for being a bother. To me." She let it sit. "And I want to tell you what that is because I've had 2 years to think about it, and I've only got one answer. That's not shyness. That's not manners. That's a woman who sat in a room with 3 men for 40 minutes and said nothing, and then spent 4 years teaching herself that she was the kind of person who deserved to say nothing." Somebody at table 9 put a hand over their mouth. "That's what it does," Eleanor said. "That's the whole thing. It doesn't take your job. Your job's just a job, you'll get another one. It takes your standing. It teaches you very patiently over years that you're not the kind of person things get explained to." She paused. "I know how that's done," she said. "I know exactly how it's done. I could teach a course." Nobody laughed. Nobody was supposed to. "Deb Kaczmarek is here tonight," Eleanor said. "She's at table 6, and she asked me not to point at her, so I'm not going to point at her." She looked out. "Deb, I'm not pointing, but I want everyone in this room to know that you are the founder of this thing, not me. I wrote a check, you wrote a letter, and you almost didn't send it, and you nearly crossed out my name twice." And Deb Kaczmarek, 56 years old from Newark, sat at table 6 and cried into a cloth napkin, while 400 of the wealthiest people in America stood up and applauded a woman who had once been fired by a letter. 11:04. He was still there when she came off. He'd moved about 4 feet, which was as far as he'd gotten in 11 minutes, and he was standing near the doors with his hands at his sides, and Eleanor Caldwell walked the length of her great-grandmother's ballroom toward him, and every eye in that building followed her, and she did not look at a single one of them. She stopped 6 feet away. "Alexander," she said. He had gotten old. That was the first thing. Not old in the specific way that only happens to men who have been carried by momentum their whole lives and then set down. "Elle," he said, "you're not supposed to be here." "I know." "You don't have a ticket." "I know," he said. "I asked. In March. I wrote to the committee." His mouth did something. Diane wrote me back. 2 lines. What did they say? She said, Alexander, the building isn't the point, and if you don't know that by now, I can't put it in a letter. Eleanor almost smiled. That's Diane, she said. Yeah. 11:06. How long do you have? She said. What? How long do you want? Tell me the number and I'll give it to you and then it's done. He looked at her. 2 minutes, he said. All right. 2 minutes, Eleanor said. Go. And Alexander Whitmore, who had once made 400 strangers love him in 90 seconds, who had talked a bank out of pulling a line of credit in 2019, who had never in his life been at a loss for the next sentence, stood in front of his ex-wife and could not start. I've had this, he said. I've had this for 2 years. I've said it 1,100 times. I know. In the car, in the shower, to my mother. His voice went. I said it to a woman on a plane in October, a stranger. I got about 4 minutes into it before I understood what I was doing. Alexander, I can't get it out, he said. I've got the whole thing and I can't get it out and I know exactly why, and I'm going to tell you why because it's the only honest thing I've got. He looked at her. It's because I rehearsed it. Eleanor Caldwell went very still. I rehearsed it, Alexander said. 2 years, same as the book, same as Cambridge, 3 nights with a highlighter. His face came apart quietly, standing up at the back of a room. I sat down to write you an apology and I studied for it. Same muscle. I don't have another one. That's what I found out, Elle. There's no second man in here. It's just the one all the way down, and he's still doing it right now, standing in front of you, and I can feel him doing it, and I can't stop. The ballroom was 60 feet away, and it might as well have been a country. That's it, Alexander said. That's what I came to say. Not sorry. I can't say sorry it comes out rehearsed, it comes out good, and you told me 2 years ago that the good is what killed you. He wiped his face with the back of his hand like a boy. So I came to say you were right, about the book. You were right about the book, and I've had 10 years, and I never once... He stopped. Elle, I never once thought about how it landed on you, he said. Not one time. In 10 years. I thought about whether it worked. 11:09. Eleanor did not say anything for a long moment. Alexander, she said, can I tell you something? Yeah. That was the best thing you've ever said to me. His face lifted. And I don't believe it, Eleanor said. The lift went out of him like air. Elle, I don't mean you're lying, she said. I want to be exact because you deserve exact, and I've got about 40 seconds of it in me. I don't think you're lying. I think you mean every word of it right now standing here at this hour. She held his eyes. And I think you'd have meant it in Cambridge, too. Alexander Whitmore stood there. That's the thing I finally understood, Eleanor said. It took me 2 years. It's not that you're a liar. It's that there's no difference for you between meaning it and performing it. There's no gap. You feel it while you're doing it. That's what makes you good at it. And Alexander, that's not a defense. That's the diagnosis. Then what do I... His voice broke wide open. What do I do? Elle, tell me what to do. You've always known. 10 years you always knew tell me what to do. And there it was. 11:10. Eleanor Caldwell looked at the man she had married in a church in Brookline with 400 people watching, and she felt it the whole thing, the entire 10 years, the hand on the back. He never felt the reflex give him room. He's ambitious. Let him have it. She felt all of it come up her spine like a tide and stand at the back of her teeth. She could have told him what to do. She knew what to do. She'd known in 2016 and 2019, and she'd known in November, and she'd known standing in a garden in 40 minutes of cold with no coat on. And God, it would have been so easy, it would have felt so good. It was the only muscle she had. No, Eleanor said. He stared at her. Elle. No, she said again, and she said it to herself as much as to him. Alexander, I'm not going to do that. Not because I want you to suffer, because I want to. Her voice shook, and she let it. You just asked me to fix you. That's the ask. That's the same ask you've been making for 10 years dressed up as an apology, and the frightening thing, the thing I need you to know is that I almost did it. Standing here, 2 years out, 6 feet away, I felt my whole body reach for it. Alexander Whitmore's mouth opened. "That's what you took," Eleanor said. "Not the 10 years, not the hour in Cambridge. You took the part of me that reaches and you wore it out, and I've spent 2 years getting it back, and I am not spending it on you." 11:12. "Do you forgive me?" he said. "Yes," Eleanor said. He looked up so fast it hurt to watch. "Yes," she said. "I forgave you a year ago on a Tuesday in a kitchen, and I want you to hear how small it was. I was making toast." Her voice was perfectly steady now. "I thought about you for about 9 seconds, and then I noticed I wasn't angry, and then the toast came up. That's it," she said. "That's what forgiveness is. Nobody tells you. Everybody thinks it's a door you walk through, and there's a person on the other side of it." She shook her head slowly. "It's not. It's just the day you notice you've stopped carrying it. And Alexander, you weren't there. You couldn't have been. It had nothing to do with you. That's what makes it real." Alexander Whitmore stood at the back of a ballroom and understood finally at 53 years old that he had been forgiven 11 months ago by a woman making toast, and that it had not been about him at all. "So we could," he said. "No. Elle, if you've forgiven me, then Alexander." She said it gently, and it was the gentlest thing in the building, and it was final. "Forgiving you was for me. It was never a door. It doesn't open onto anything. It's just a thing I put down." 11:13. "I loved you," he said. "I know." "Elle, I did." "I know," Eleanor said. And this was the thing that broke him, that she said it without any fight in it at all. "I believe you. I've never once thought you didn't. That's what nobody understands about this story, and I've stopped trying to explain it." She looked at him steadily. "You loved me, Alexander. You just never knew me, and you never noticed the difference, and you'd have gone to your grave calling the first one the second one." He didn't answer. He couldn't. "Your 2 minutes are up," Eleanor said. "You went over by 9. Elle to Alexander." She put out her hand. He looked at it. Then he took it, and Eleanor Caldwell shook her ex-husband's hand at the back of her great-grandmother's ballroom, once firmly the way you'd end a meeting, and 400 people watched, and not one of them ever agreed on what it meant. "Go home," she said. 11:15. He went, and she did not watch him go. That was the part Catherine Doyle told people about for years at kitchen tables. Not the handshake, that Eleanor turned around before he was through the doors. "Elle, Catherine, are you—" "Ask me something else," Eleanor said. "Ask me literally anything else right now, please." Catherine Doyle looked at her friend of 29 years. "Deb Kaczmarek's been standing behind you for 4 minutes," she said, "trying to figure out how to say thank you, and she's going to lose her nerve in about 10 seconds. And Eleanor Caldwell turned around. 11:17. "Ms. Caldwell." "Eleanor. Eleanor." Deb Kaczmarek had a cloth napkin balled in one fist and had clearly been rehearsing something for 11 minutes. "I just wanted to, Deb, say thank you because you didn't have to, and I know you get 100 letters and—" "Deb." Deb Kaczmarek stopped. "You wrote me a letter and told me not to write back," Eleanor said. "Do you remember that?" "Yeah." "Why?" Deb's chin went. "Because I thought it was strange," she said. "Some woman from Newark writing to somebody like you." Eleanor Caldwell took Deb Kaczmarek's hand off the napkin and held it in both of hers. "Deb," she said, "there is nobody in this room tonight who has less right to be here than me, and that includes the waiters. And I want you to understand that I mean it exactly the way it sounds. That's not—" "I was handed all of it," Eleanor said. "Every single thing. The name, the money, the room, the ballroom, the great-grandmother. I've never built one thing in my life, and I'm 43 years old, and I'm going to be paying that back until I die." She held on. "You wrote a letter in ballpoint pen and started $6.2 million in one afternoon on a bad day with the TV on." Deb Kaczmarek stared at her. "So don't you ever," Eleanor said, "ever apologize to me for being a bother. There's not a person in this building who's earned that from you. Not me, not one of them." And Deb Kaczmarek from Newark, 56 years old, put her face in a cloth napkin at the back of the Whitfield Grand Hall. 11:21. Later, much later, when the room had gone down to about 40 people and the committee had stopped pretending there was an agenda, William Caldwell found his daughter sitting in a chair at table 14 with her shoes off. He sat down next to her. 84 now. The cane was real these days. "Well," he said. "Well." They sat there for a while. "I saw you shake his hand," William said. "You want to tell me about it?" "No," Eleanor said. "All right." They sat some more. "Dad?" "You asked me a question 2 years ago," Eleanor said. "In this room, right here. You put your hand on my shoulder and you asked me if I was ready to come home. I remember. I said yes. You did." Eleanor Caldwell looked out at her great-grandmother's ballroom with her shoes off and her hands for once not folded. "I've been thinking about it for 2 years," she said. "And Dad, I want to tell you something, and I don't want you to be hurt by it." "Go on." "I wasn't ready to come home," Eleanor said. "I said yes because I was drowning, and you put a hand out, and I'd have said yes to anything." She turned and looked at her father. "I didn't come home. I went to Brookline, and I sat in your house for 4 months, and I ironed a shirt. That's not home. That's a harbor. That's a place you go when the weather's wrong." William Caldwell nodded slowly. "I know," he said. "You know." "Elle." The old man's mouth moved. "You think I didn't know 2 years? You've been in that house 2 years, and you've never once put a picture on a wall." Eleanor laughed. It caught her sideways and came out cracked. "So, ask me again," she said. "What?" "Ask me the question again, Dad. Right now, same room, ask me again." William Caldwell looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he put his hand on her shoulder, the way he had 2 years earlier, in the same building in front of 400 people who were no longer there. "Eleanor," he said, "are you ready to come home?" And Eleanor Caldwell put her hand on top of her father's hand and said, "No, Dad, I'm already here." She wasn't talking about the building. Every person who told that story afterward got that part wrong. They had her looking around the ballroom, gesturing at the chandeliers, claiming her great-grandmother's hall like a queen. She never did any of that. Her shoes were off. Her eyes were closed. And what she meant, and what her father understood instantly and completely sitting beside her at the wreckage of Table 14 at 11:29 on a Saturday night in July, was much simpler and much harder and had taken her 43 years. She was not a door. She was not a name. She was not a wife or a Caldwell or the quiet one or the woman in the video or the plain dress at Table 14 or anybody's second thought. She was Eleanor. And she had finally stopped agreeing not to be.